Well, I call to order this regular session of the Atascadero City Council meeting, and I would be honored to lead you in a pledge to the flag, so please stand as you are able. Of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Borbo,
Here.
Councilmember Daris,
Here.
Councilmember Funk. Here. Mayor Pro Tem Newsom.
Here.
Mayor Moreno.
Here.
All present.
Thank you. Well, if you are either attending in person or you're on our webinar or listening on the phone, we welcome you this evening. If you are on YouTube or listening on the phone, we would love to have you talk at public forum at any of the items that are on our agenda if you would like to. So if you are watching this and not on the phone yet, you can call in to Zoom, and that number is 669-900-6833. I'm going to say that again, 669-900-6833. And then the meeting ID is 889-2347-9018. One more time, 889-2347-9018. And it is also on the front of our agenda. So if you have access to that online at atascadero.org. When you do call in, let us know what item it is that you would like to be speaking on. Can I get a motion to approve the agenda?
Also moved.
We have a motion by Councilmember Borbo, a second by Mayor Pro Tem Newsom. We will waive the reading in full of all ordinances appearing on this agenda, and the titles of the ordinances will be read aloud by the city clerk at the first reading and after the motion before the council votes. Roll call, please.
Mayor, that was Susan Funk.
Oh, sorry. You sounded very much like I will make that correction. Second by Councilmember Funk. Thank you.
Councilmember Borbo,
Yes.
Councilmember Funk. Yes. Councilmember Daris,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Newsom,
Yes.
Mayor Moreno.
Yes, ma'am.
Motion passes.
Thank you. And I will ask our city attorney, Mr. Perrick, if there is any reportable action from our closed session on May 10th.
The answer is there was no reportable action.
Thank you very much. We have no presentations this evening. We're on to our consent calendar, and the consent calendar contains items that are considered routine or non-controversial by city staff and can be voted through in one motion unless there's a member of the council or member of the public wishing to pull an item. So I will look to my council members if there's anyone wishing to pull an item. I am seeing none, and I will go to the webinar. Let me move over to our attendees. If there's anyone on there wishing to pull an item or speak on a consent calendar item, please raise your hand in the webinar. If you're on the phone, *9. I'm seeing no one in the webinar. Luke, do we have anyone on the phone? No. All right, we'll bring it back to the council and ask for a motion.
I'll move approval of the consent agenda.
I'll second.
Motion by Councilmember Borbo, second by Mayor Pro Tem Newsom. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Borbo,
Yes. Yes.
Councilmember Daris,
Yes.
Councilmember Funk.
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Newsom,
Yes.
Mayor Moreno.
Yes, ma'am.
Motion passes.
Thank you. We are on to updates from our city manager, Ms. Rickard.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I want to let you know that from all our reports, there was a great turnout this past Saturday for the Chamber Awards Annual Gala at Spring Hill Suites. So this year event included awards for 2 local women of influence, both Hush Harbor's Penny Monroe, and Angela Cisneros. Angela's was a surprise. I heard that both awards were pretty amazing. The Printery Foundation was awarded for Community Organization of the Year, and Citizen of the Year was awarded to our own Kevin Campion, who runs our George C. Beatty A-Town Skate Park on behalf of the city and does an amazing job with those kids. We also had the 5th annual Lake Fest on Saturday. So Lake Fest was combined with Children's Day in the Park and included more than 40 fun and informational booths for kids with rock painting, face painting, glitter tattoos, bounce houses, and so much more. And Luke's going to catch up with my pictures here in a second. There we go. You got to look at the the boat races. They're so much fun. There were also plenty of great food booths, plus live music by Brementown, and the first annual Kids Fishing Derby. Always a crowd pleaser was the fun and exciting cardboard boat regatta, where kids made their boats at the park and then raced them in the lake. And 2-for-1 entries tickets to the zoo were available. And this year's event was a partnership between Friends of Atascadero Lake and the Link Family Resource Center. So a great day there in the park on Saturday. I also have some good news regarding our own Wild Fields Brew House. So Wild Fields Brew House here in Atascadero recently broke a craft beer record at the World Beer Cup, which is the largest international beer competition. Wild Fields Brew won 4 golds at the World Beer Cup. So that's pretty amazing. This year's World Beer Cup was the largest ever, with over 10,000 entries, 10,000, and they took home 4 of them from nearly 2,500 breweries representing 57 countries from around the world. So Wild Fields will be celebrating their historic moment with the public on Friday, June 3rd, featuring their stellar world-class beer board of over 16 house beers, food specials, a special cask ale, silent disco, not quite sure what that is. I'll have to ask Jackie. And as always, their family-friendly vibe. So this event is open to the public. That's on this Friday, June 3rd, or next Friday, June 3rd. Sorry. So excited, want to move it forward. Another exciting thing is the first business at La Plaza is open. So LOL Yogurt is now open at La Plaza with an amazing lineup of yogurt flavors, toppings, and other delicious treats. Councilmember Funk and I, during our meeting last night, walked by, and then I went back after and got some pomegranate raspberry frozen yogurt that was amazing. It looked like it was a really nice place. There were people sitting outside at the tables and chairs right there on the patio. Wonderful place. Please stop by, support their new businesses here in town, and excited to see a new business here at La Plaza. We have an upcoming event. It'll be Memorial Day ceremony at the Faces of Freedom. The Atascadero Veterans Memorial Foundation will be holding their 2022 Memorial Day ceremony at the Faces of Freedom on Morrow Road near Atascadero Lake Park on Monday, May 30th, beginning at 11 a.m., and it will last just over an hour. It will start with a flyover by the Australia Warbirds. The colors will be presented. The national anthem will be sung by members of the Atascadero School Choir, and taps will be played by Darren Gong. A memorial wreath will be laid in memory of Cy Tenenberg. Seating is limited, so community members are encouraged to bring their own chairs. There will not be a barbecue lunch following the ceremony this year. And the members of the foundation look forward to seeing everyone on Memorial Day to honor those who paid the ultimate sacrifice. So that is open to the public. Again, it's Monday, 11 a.m. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions the council may have.
I did want to add that at the chamber event, our business of the year was Central Coast Distillery. So Anna and Eric Olson were honored, and it was really exciting to have them. Eric was very exuberant in his acceptance and very generous with our community, and it was a well-deserved award. So congratulations to all the recipients. Any questions? Yes, Councilmember Funk.
I just want, with regard to the honor that Wild Fields Brewhouse here gained, am I correct in understanding that at that particular World Cup of beer, that no brewery had ever won that many gold medals before?
That is absolutely correct. This was record-setting, first-time ever event.
Thank you. We're all very proud of our own Wild Fields.
And Atascadero on the map. Nice. On the beer map.
And my
That's,
sincerest apologies to Central Coast Distillery. I did not mean to.
Oh, I
miss
know
that.
you didn't. There's a lot to celebrate.
me,
and
I like
sometimes
Central
things
Coast
just
Distillery, yes.
we're many of us are fans. Excellent.
Yes.
Well, thank you very much for that update. Next, we're on to community forum, and this is the portion of our meeting that is reserved for persons wishing to address the council on items that are not on our agenda this evening, but over which we have jurisdiction. Speakers are limited to 3 minutes, and we will have the timer, either if you are here in person, we'll have the timer up there for your edification, or if you are on Zoom, we will show that on the screen, so you'll see the timer. Subjects that are brought up during community forum are not typically, become a subject of discussion amongst us, but we will triage if we need to for any follow-up. We have a maximum of 30 minutes for community forum. And so anybody wishing to speak, go ahead and come forward to the podium. If you're in the webinar, go ahead and raise your hand, or a *9 if you're on the phone. All right, I currently see in the webinar, I see Zachariah Jackson. So let's go ahead and bring him on.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
We can.
This is Zach Jackson, president of Atascadero Professional Firefighters. Not really anything to really talk about, just more of a thank you to council for your continuous support and your attendance at our 100-year anniversary open house. We had a great time with all the live fire demonstrations, and then obviously educating the public on wildfire preparedness. So from the fire department, we just wanted to say thank you for your support and your attendance.
Thank you, Zach. We loved being there, and we loved helping you put out the fire. I'll put air quotes around the word helping. Thank you very much. All right, next speaker here at the podium.
Hi, my name is Ron Walters from Atascadero, and I'd like to talk about this pamphlet I received in the mail from the Bob Jones campaign. And it seems it's very disturbing to me that there's all of this about Atascadero looking like Atascadero City is supporting one particular candidate. But the most egregious part is where Bob Jones is standing with the chief of police, which looks like an endorsement. Now, it's my understanding, and I would like a clarification, the chief of police did actually say, do not use this picture in your campaign ads. And obviously, if that was said, then that picture was used without approval. And I believe in the city that no city member, no city staff person can endorse a candidate, and rightfully so. Now, I also believe that obviously the Atascadero Fire Union and the police union, they can do their own endorsement, which they endorse a different candidate. So my question tonight is, number one, would you clarify that the chief of police said, do not use this picture? The other thing is, this puts the city in a very awkward position, and I understand that. You're unintentionally being sucked into a campaign of which you don't want to be, and you shouldn't be as a city. And I was wondering, is the city going to make a statement disavowing or disconnecting themselves from what looks like a quasi endorsement to one particular candidate over another candidate? And so will the city be issuing any kind of letter or any kind of clarification to this issue? I think that's all I have to say.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next speaker. And anyone on the webinar? Every time we get that timer on, I have to go back to my attendees here. I'm not seeing anyone on the webinar yet. Next speaker, welcome.
Good evening, council. Jeff Oslin, resident business owner and a candidate for District 2 supervisor. But I just wanted to remind our residents here in Atascadero, being I do on Glenn's Repair, that we've seen a couple of power outages in the last week. And the reason I'm up here tonight is I want to remind everybody, please do not run your generator in a closed, confined space, whether it's inside your house or garage. Generators need to be ran outside so you don't have carbon monoxide poisoning. And I know we're going to have more power outages. I was notified tonight by PG&E that they have another one coming for 8 hours on the west side of town. So once again, a lot of people have generators. Some people may not quite know how to use them right. Do not use them indoors. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, if there's anyone in here wishing to speak, like make your way to the podium. If you're on the webinar, please do raise your hand. On the phone, *9. I'm not seeing anyone at the moment. All right, we will go ahead and close community forum. And I'm going to ask our city clerk. I did not look at the time when we started.
6:12.
6:12. All right. So because we did not take a full 30 minutes for community forum, it will stay open until 6:42. And so if there's any member of the public that decides they would like to speak at community forum, you can go ahead and raise your hand or let us know, and we will get to you at the earliest possible convenience, which actually will be after our next item, which could be a long item. So just know that you'll have a ways to wait, but if you make that indication prior to 6:42, we will make sure to come back to you. All right. So thank you very much for your comments and questions. I will ask, Mr. Walters asked for some clarification. I would ask the city manager if you might be able to address his questions.
We do have the police chief here on town. I do want to emphasize the city is not endorsing, city management staff is not endorsing any candidate. We do typically ask, we routinely ask not to be included in any campaign literature or that. We are public officials. We cannot stop anyone from taking pictures of ourselves or our facilities, and they do sometimes end up in campaign literature. I don't know if the police chief would like to add anything to that statement.
Chief, if you're there, is there something you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I can add briefly that I did send the campaign an email advising them that I did not authorize the use of the picture for endorsement, and they were specifically told not to use my picture for endorsement. I did receive a call from a candidate apologizing for the use, but clearly he was told at the time that it couldn't be used for political purposes.
Thank you very much. And thank you, City Manager, for the clarification. All right, we are on to our one big item tonight, and that is our management report on the Affordable Inclusionary Housing Impact Fee Nexus Studies, plural studies. And I will turn this over to our Community Development Director, Mr. Phil Dinsmore.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, Council. I did note that you did say this was going to be a long item, so I am begging for your patience tonight as we get through some of the details of this particular topic. And it's not an easy topic, I must say, but it's something we have been discussing for several years. It is part of our current housing element. And tonight, we're not going to be making any decisions, but staff is going to be asking you for feedback and input on a wide variety of strategies after we go through some numbers. I will be joined tonight by our consultant, Ashley. She's from EPS. She will also be online to go through some of the details of the information we're going to present you tonight. But first of all, I want to give some background and basically try and lay out why we're here tonight, why we're discussing this. In general, we do have an allocation of housing that we're expected to create every year. It's called ARENA. And we did have housing element policies we've adopted that are in alignment with some of the state directives. So we'll be talking about that. We'll also be talking about what existing tools we have today before us, what we're using now to create this type of housing, and the potential for expanding that toolbox. Additionally, things like affordability by design, deferrals or waivers of fees, modifying our existing inclusionary program, and even going as far as saying, should there be a housing impact fee? And a lot of the work, by the way, that was grant funded that we hired EPS for was looking at a Nexus study and options for a fee. And it's not something we have to adopt, but we wanted to lay out those options and what that would look like and what that nexus looks like. And then finally, we will leave you with some input and direction and sort of a menu that you could choose from. And just to set the stage, what really helps us out when we talk about affordable housing? What does that mean? And so if we look at the numbers on the far right of your screen there, you'll see a column there. It's from 2021. That's the maximum income for a 3-person average household that would fit the affordable categories. Most commonly, we see the moderate income category. So for a 3-person household to meet the criteria to get a moderate income deed restricted affordable house, you would need to make less than 105,600. And it goes on down the line there for a median income, 88,000. For low income, 70,450. Very low, 44,050. So you can see these amounts are not really that small amounts. And in fact, a lot of our jobs in our community fall in a lot of these categories when you talk about teachers or firefighters or police officers. A lot of the more common jobs in our community are really within these categories. So really it's our workforce. Also going to reflect back on our regional housing allocation. These are the numbers that we've gotten so far. Circled in red, I'll highlight that because it's very difficult to get the extremely low, the very low, and the low. And the numbers in red there are still what's remaining in our balance over our cycle, our 8-year cycle that goes to 2028. It's very easy to get our moderate. We normally get very close to that. So far, we've got 93. We almost always exceed our market rate. And by the projects that are in a pipeline now, we'll probably exceed our market rate number of housing units, which is good. We're building housing in our community. It's not that we're not doing that. It's just that it's very difficult to achieve the housing in the lower end. So here's some of the projects that we do have going on right now. We'll call under construction. Emerald Ridge has several phases. It doesn't actually have any affordable units in it, but it's a big chunk of our what we'll call above moderate units. Grand Oaks, it does have a little bit of affordability in it that are deed restricted, 3 units. The rest of them can actually fit this category called affordable by design. Now I have that in a bracket 27 because the reality is the state wants to see a study for us to verify that they actually meet those standards before we can lock that in, but we think we'll make that. And then there's several other projects that are developing now. They're just starting out. The Hartburg is one on the south end of the city between El Camino Real and the freeway. And it will have some affordable units. The Block, that's the newest project downtown. It's actually a mixed use project in our downtown commercial district on Traffic Way on the hillside there. It actually has one dedicated low income unit there. So that's really interesting. And the rest are market rate units. But the majority of these other projects don't have affordable units, but they actually at least give us some of those market rate units in our community. Anyway, this gives you kind of what's coming along. And this last category I want to show you is things that are approved through planning, but they haven't started with construction permits yet. And a lot of these projects are calling us asking for contributions, which we don't have funding for. Del Rio Ridge, we did pledge to contribute money towards their project. That's an affordable housing project being sponsored by People's Self-Help Housing on the north end of the city. The city did pledge $400,000 towards that. The rest of these are projects that have low income potential. That's what they've been touted as. They've been approved as that with density bonuses, but they haven't come forward yet for construction permits. They are currently seeking grant funding. And in order to be successful with that, it's likely they're going to come seek money from the city. California Manor is the first one that's been knocking on our door, asking for $2 million. We don't have the funds to support that. So if we could support all these projects, these are things that could potentially be built to be able to accommodate that category in rental housing. So I told you I'd give you a little bit of history. I don't want to give you too much of that. We've gone through this a couple of times. We did adopt our latest edition of our general plan housing element back in November of 2020. It identified the numbers that we have in our arena. It did identify the potential for a broad spectrum of tools and incentive programs. In one of those programs, in fact, that we actually adopted in that housing element that the state also endorsed was specifically talking about what we're talking about tonight. And it's, can we work on a housing ordinance? And I'm just going to read that real quick because that's some key points I want to pull out of it. And it basically says to evaluate the city's inclusionary housing policy, and that's a policy we currently have in place, and consider replacing that policy with an ordinance. And the ordinance should be consistent with the state density bonus regulations, which have changed a lot recently, by the way, and then address changing economic and regulatory considerations. And it says the city will continue to monitor the impact of that existing policy on the production of market rate housing in response to market conditions. And if the city's inclusionary housing approach presents an obstacle to the development of the city's fair share of regional housing needs, the city will revise the policy and ordinance accordingly. So I think the story we're going to tell you tonight is that we do see a potential for us reaching a deficit because of the policy changes that are happening at the state level and because of the things that are happening that are taking housing out of the discretionary process and making it by right in most of the zoning districts, which makes it challenging for us to put on conditions to require affordable housing. So we met and we talked about this in March and October of last year, and we did decide that we should be looking at things like affordability by design in projects. How can we expand those opportunities? And then how can we explore potentially, this is just an ask, an impact fee program for low and very low income units. Now, impact fees do require a background technical study. We did get grant funding from the state to be able to help with some of these studies. And that's where we've asked EPS to step in and do a study to look at this nexus between new market rate development and the demand for affordable units. Now, a concern has been raised, very valid concern, that any fees that we add to development is going to impede market rate development. Very valid concern, and we're going to talk about that again and again tonight, because the key here is to keep a balance. How can we meet the objectives? How can we have workforce housing? How can we have housing for all categories and meet the state objectives, but not impact our housing development in our community? Because we're doing a great job in our community, creating those units, and we are an affordable place to live and develop from a general standpoint. So the existing tools that we've been operating off of over the years are the state density bonus. That's a mandate that we have to comply with. It's changed quite a bit in the last couple of years, and we need to modify our existing regulations to keep up with that. Right now, that's still okay. Not a huge deal that we're not consistent with the state because the state supersedes us. I can talk about that. The good thing is accessory dwelling units and junior accessory dwelling units, we call them ADUs and JADUs for short, now do count towards affordable housing. So they let us count all of those, and half of them can go to low and the other half go towards moderate. And in a few weeks, this summer, we'll be bringing back to you a new ordinance to actually incorporate the city's latest changes on accessory dwelling units and really create and craft an ordinance that's localized for Atascadero. And that'll really help that. In addition, I will let you know that the city is playing the lead role in a stock accessory dwelling unit program. So we'll have free plans that people come and order from, which will be a tremendous savings for them to develop an ADU. So that's a really good program. That counts towards affordable housing. That's going to make a huge dent in our arena, and there's not much we have to do for that. It doesn't penalize anybody else. That's a really good one. And then we have our existing interim inclusionary housing program. Now that particular program is not going to be used much in the future. Really, the only time it gets triggered is upon what they call a legislative act coming before the city council, typically for a zoning change. And typically we would see those when folks came in for a planned development zone to modify their density. But now the state is giving those things away by right with the state density bonus. And they're also giving those things away by right because when we write our housing element, they require us to set aside land for multifamily housing projects that have to be developed by right. So it's a rarely used tool. And I think that's part of the reasoning for tonight, looking at what are our other options, or could we modify that existing program to be able to use it more frequently? Just a little more detail also on the state density bonus, what it does. It allows people that build certain percentages of affordable housing to get a bonus in the amount of units they can put on their property. For the most part, 20% if they're doing 5% to very low or 10% to lower income. And you can even get a bonus for moderate income units. It's a 5% bonus. But the big thing that this state density bonus does, it mandates that we provide what they call concessions or waivers. And it means that we have to basically set aside our development standards. We have to let them build taller. We have to let them build closer to our property line. We have to let them put in less landscape. We have to let them put in less parking. We have to give them ultimate flexibility as a waiver or concession if they meet certain thresholds for affordable housing. So that's a big deal on that. And we need to have some policies that really speak to that locally. And that's something we'll have to work on in the near future. So a little also more about our existing inclusionary housing policy. As I mentioned, it's only triggered for projects like a rezone. It does have a threshold of 11 plus units. It does require, if it is triggered, 20% affordability. And in a single family project, let's say someone's doing a single family tract of homes, all of those units could be in the moderate category. Now, if it's multifamily, there's a different percentage ratio, 20% very low, 37% low, and 43% moderate. That's on our existing policy. Now, the density bonus law has changed so much that it doesn't match the language that's in this particular policy. And so this policy says that projects that comply with the state density bonus law, in other words, just putting in a few moderate units, which they can do, would be exempted from any of these policies. So a bit of a loophole that needs to be cleaned up. Now, this program does generally work because of that to create moderate units. But again, moderate units can be easily created by an affordable by design policy, and we get a lot of them through accessory dwelling units in projects like the recent Grand Oaks project. Now, it still does have a little caveat in there that they can pay an in lieu fee, which is equal to 5% of the estimated construction value if the project is less than 11 units. The toolbox. This is something we're going to talk about a little bit tonight, pulling out of the toolbox. And we're going to illustrate to you tonight kind of a toolbox approach of things that ideas, we'll call them, that the city council can pull from and we can discuss and piece things together to see how we can do a program that works for Atascadero. So we're going to introduce some topics to you that we're already familiar with, but some new tactics on some of these things. Affordability by design. How could we really get there? We are working on things called objective design standards, which would give out incentives for doing smaller lot sizes and smaller units, which really those are the key roots of affordability by design. We have come up with some recipes for impact fee waivers or deferrals, which would be a long-term loan of impact fees. Other communities are doing that and finding success with that. And that does count towards helping out these affordable housing projects and helps them get credit towards their loans. So that really works. We could also look at our existing inclusionary program and whether we adopt it as an ordinance or leave it as a policy. Could we update that to meet the state's latest density bonus standards and maybe broaden the category so it's not just for rezoning projects? We can do that. So that's what we can look at. And then lastly, the affordable housing impact fee and the Nexus study. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about those numbers and what that means. And still, it's another tool in the toolbox. I want to elaborate a little more on each of these topics. And what is really affordability by design? It doesn't mean making something of lesser quality, so it's more affordable. But what it means is typically making something smaller. A lot of these prices are set to not only square footage of a unit, but square footage of a lot, its location. And I'm going to always point back to the Grand Oaks project. I toured that project the other day, and it truly is an affordable by design project. They've got a 3-bedroom house that's fit into a square footage area of less than 1,000 square feet. I think it's like 980 square feet. And you walk through that house and you think it's a 1,200 square foot house, but because of the ceiling heights and the outdoor spaces, it's not. It's really interesting. And that's truly the character of affordability by design. It's not restricted with a deed restriction. So you don't have to income qualify. You don't have to have a contest. You don't have to monitor that. But its market rate fits the categories of these affordability categories for moderate category. That's a really neat thing to do. And definitely as you do this higher density housing closer to downtown, it's a good idea. Now, what's challenging is to make units in that category in the low and very low category. They're either going to have to be really, really small or in an unusual location. And that's where you've got to really play with sort of subsidizing that housing and doing different things to pay it down artificially. So we're going to have some discussion items. We're not going to discuss this now, but I want to plant the seed so that at the end of the presentation, you know what the items we're going to discuss. We are continuing to work on objective design standards for multifamily sites. These can build in incentives, bonuses, and other features. And ADUs are already in these categories, and those stock plans will be available soon. But this will be a discussion category because it's tool number 1 from our toolbox. Tool number 2 is the waivers I mentioned earlier. And that could come in a couple of different ways. It could mean we could say, all right, you're going to build 10 units. You've got an impact fee due of $20,000 per unit. So it's $200,000. We're going to waive that if you do all low or very low or a percentage of those. Some cities do that. Other cities, which is a smart idea, is they defer those for 20 years or 10 years at a set term at a simple interest. And they don't collect that interest up front. They collect it at the very end. And that reduces that startup cost, which enables the affordability. It also enhances their opportunity to gain additional points on their grant. A little bit of administration with a program like that. Rochelle tells me it's not a heck of a lot, but we'll see. But something to keep in mind that as it is now, our existing development impact fees aren't really adequate to build the needed infrastructure we have. They're a deposit towards it, but they don't get there all the way. So when we start waiving these fees, it will further that existing gap. So the money's got to come from somewhere. So another discussion item that we'll have a little later on, toolbox item number 2. And we can go through those key points. Toolbox item number 3. Could we modify our inclusionary housing policy? Of course we can. We can have different thresholds for it. We can modify it to incorporate the latest changes from the state density bonus law. And make sure that that loophole just for moderate units isn't there and that we can get low and very low income units. Now, the Nexus study said that, we could go as high as a 22% inclusionary requirement for rental and up to 27% for sale units. Those numbers, they are shocking and they probably do exceed feasibility, but that's the ceiling. That's what we want to show you. That's what the Nexus study created. I'm not going to spoil what Ashley's going to tell you about those details, so hang on to that. Some surrounding jurisdictions have inclusionary requirements that range from a low of 5% all the way up to 15%. But if we keep that policy, we've got to play with it a bit. We've got to focus on low and very low and eliminate the state density bonus project exemption. So let's discuss how we can focus on low and very low, the percentage requirements, and thresholds for payment of in lieu fees. We'll have that topic at the end to discuss, but I do want to touch on the number 4, and that's the impact fees. Likely to be a controversial discussion. I understand that. We're still going to supply this tool to you as an option to look at, and it would be a fee that's added to the development when someone comes in to build a series of new homes. It might not just be on one home. It might be a certain size home. There's all kinds of different variables you can add to this, but it'd be for new housing. And that has to be supported by the Nexus study, and that's what the numbers will show us. It could be based on a floor area. It could be based on a development type. It could start at a certain threshold. It could start on a certain number of units. So those are some things to think about. There's a lot of flexibility of how it could be implemented. So some items to consider. Should the city adopt some level of affordable housing impact fees? And like I just mentioned, how could those fees be structured? And would you want to exempt certain units from fees, units that are already deed restricted? A mobile home. If a house is burned down or destroyed in an earthquake, should it have to pay fees if it comes back in? Should ADUs that count as affordable units be charged those fees? Right now, most ADUs are actually exempted from fees anyway, if they're less than 750 square feet. The larger ones are charged some development impact fees on a proportional amount. And then apartments, should those be exempted? So those are options. Those are things to think about that could happen. Now I'm going to shift gears a bit because I know Ashley is there. I can see her and she would love to join and talk about all the numbers. Ashley, how are you doing tonight?
I am doing very well. Can you hear me okay? Will
I
give me
can
a
hear you
thumbs
just
up?
fine.
Awesome.
And I'm gonna click through the slides for you so you can tell me, okay?
Excellent. Next slide, please. So tonight, as Phil mentioned, I'm going to go through for you, provide a summary of the Nexus studies that EPS was retained to prepare. And I wanted to start with an overview of our methodology, just so that everyone understands our approach. And Phil alluded to this, but want to reestablish that state law really requires that if jurisdictions are going to adopt impact fees, there needs to be an accompanying Nexus study that describes and quantifies the logic or the relationship between new development and the resulting fees. And in the case of affordable housing impact fees, the Nexus logic is based on calculating the impact of new market rate housing on the need for affordable workforce housing. And there are 2 Nexus studies that were included in your packet in draft form, one for rental residential development and one for ownership or for sale residential development. It's because the economics of these 2 types of development are so different. And in both cases, we work through the questions on the screen before you to develop the Nexus. So I'll just go through these questions because it's really the underpinning of the legal argument. And when we're trying to establish the impact of new market rate housing, we want to ask ourselves what type of housing is being built in our community in Atascadero, and how much do the households buying the housing or renting the housing earn and then spend in the local economy. And then we move on and we look at how that income is spent through the economy in various industries. And then we can calculate how many jobs are generated from that spending. So if a new household moves in and is spending money at a grocery store, we can translate that spending to the number of jobs that are needed to serve that new resident. We then know from Bureau of Labor Statistics how much these employees earn. And then we look at how many units of employee housing are really needed to house those employees. We don't have a ratio of 1 employee to 1 house. There are often multiple earners per household. And so that's what that step 5 is about there. And question number 6 here is, well, what is the gap between affordable housing development costs? How much does it cost to build this unit of affordable housing? And how much can that employee household afford? What is their purchasing power or their rental power or their ability to afford that unit through their rents? And we go back just 1 slide, Phil. But this is good. It's a preview of where we're going. It's tied to this step 6. And then step 7 is really taking that gap and tying it into the number of employees that we estimated. What is the residential impact fee that will address that gap? So we'll walk through some of that, but I think that's a just sort of an appropriate level summary at this point of our methodology. Okay, next slide, Phil. So as I referenced, part of the Nexus analysis requires that we evaluate how much lower income households can afford based on the state income limits that Phil previewed early on. And then we compare that amount to how much it costs to build a new unit of housing in Atascadero. And the resulting difference is what we call the gap analysis. And it's a really critical part of how we develop the impact fees that we're discussing tonight. So to do this analysis, we came up with a development prototype, and we were really wanting to identify an efficient type of development that can be built in the city. And we settled on an efficient, I mean that from a space perspective, from an economic perspective, all the ways. And we settled on a 2 to 3 story multifamily rental development, a density of about 24 units to the acre, and 2 bedrooms and 2 surface parking spaces. And we vetted all of this with developers who are active in the region. It's consistent with zoning, what zoning allows. And then using current land values and current development cost estimates, both hard and soft costs, and accounting for developer return, because if you don't get that, you don't have any development at all. We see that it's costing north of $600,000 a door to develop a unit of housing. So park that for a moment, but then we look at what very low, and moderate income households can afford, and we compare where the gap is. It's really not surprising that the gap is greatest for very low income households and less for moderate income households. It's important to note, though, that even households at moderate income levels are challenged in affording market rate housing. So there's still a subsidy required. And then these gaps are multiplied by the number of households in need of housing, and that's what results in our Nexus justified impact fees. Next slide, please. We wanted to put this up here before we flash this up here, excuse me, before we shared the Nexus study results. Next slide. So let's start with a summary of the Nexus results for new rental residential development. For a rental product, we looked at rents in the market area, and we aligned the unit type and size with average rents. So for example, you can see on here and in the Nexus study, the average 1-bedroom unit is about 750 square feet. It's renting for about $2,200 a month. Just a little further down there, a 3-bedroom unit is larger at 1,200 square feet on average and renting for more like $3,000 a month. So these rents, they tell us something about the household income of the people occupying these units. And then based on consumer expenditure survey, which is publicly available data, we know how much households at these income levels are spending on consumer goods and services. And new households and new household expenditures support new jobs in Atascadero, and some of those new employees are paid wages lower than what is needed to purchase or rent market rate housing. And so this is really what the Nexus study is all about. It's calculating the fees that would be required to fully mitigate the impact of that new development. So the fees are shown here and in the report on both a per unit basis and a per square foot basis. State law actually now requires that the impact fees be charged on residential, or state law now requires that impact fees that are charged to new residential development should be charged on a per square foot basis, just as a best practice. Okay, so back to our 1-bedroom example here. The maximum fee on a per square foot basis that is supported by the Nexus calculations is approximately $60 a square foot. And you might observe as you look at these numbers that while the fee per unit increases as the size of the unit increases, the fee per square foot decreases because the unit fees are being divided by increasingly larger square footages. And then for information only, we add this column on the far right, which is labeled Implied Maximum Inclusionary Requirement. And this is provided to share with you what an on-site inclusionary requirement would need to be if you were to fully mitigate the impact of new development. So for example, if you had a 10-unit rental development consisting of 1-bedroom units, we're in that 1-bedroom category, you would need to require that 17% or 1.7 units would be provided on site as an affordable unit. And this is just extra information because we had already done the research and had the calculations to support the analysis. Next slide, please. And now we'll look at a very similar table, but this time it's for sale or ownership housing. And here we looked at transaction data for recently constructed homes in Atascadero and aligned those unit sizes with home values. And again, working off of home value, we can estimate the annual household income needed to purchase a home at this price, and then the typical expenditures on goods and services that in turn contribute to new jobs. So a 1,500 square foot home here requires an impact fee of $42 a square foot to fully mitigate its impact on the need for affordable housing. Whereas a 2,500 square foot home, the fee per square foot is $38.71. And again, you can see the pattern we saw before where the per unit fees are higher, the larger the home. Next slide, please. So we did have that warning slide earlier. I'll just note again that the maximum fee levels we reviewed really are too high to be supported by new development. So yes, those are the fees that would be required if we expected that new development would mitigate 100% of its impact on the need for affordable housing in the community. But here, as Phil mentioned, we're really trying to balance competing objectives, and the maximum Nexus-based fees are too high. So we wanted to understand what fees would be feasible. And we tested the feasibility of a range of inclusionary requirements and a range of affordable of impact fee levels. And we prepared financial pro formas reflecting the expected costs of new development based on the Nexus study and our market research and developer interviews. And we compared those costs to the revenues that could be generated given various mixes of market rate and affordable housing or fee levels. For purposes of this analysis, the analytical metric for evaluating feasibility, well, it really varies for the development of ownership units versus rental units. And for ownership units, the threshold for feasibility is defined by it's defined as a 15% profit margin, which is profit divided by gross revenue. And then for the rental units, the threshold for feasibility is defined as a 5% yield on cost, which is an annual net operating income divided by development costs. And so using these threshold feasibility assumptions, we can solve for the highest fee that achieves feasibility. And for ownership projects, the maximum fee that still allows a developer to achieve that return threshold is calculated at about $15.50 a square foot. For rental projects, the maximum fee that achieves that feasibility threshold is calculated at $10.12 a square foot. And it's really important for me to say that, while these calculations are based on market research and current costs and values, every applicant, every development will present unique economic considerations. And some developments may not be able to absorb these fees, while others may be able to absorb fees higher than what are indicated here. Wanted to get in that caveat. Next slide, please. Thank you. So at this point, we've established the Nexus justified fees, and you would be justified from a Nexus perspective in adopting fees up to these Nexus maximums, but they're too high. We've also established the highest fees that typical new development may be able to absorb, and this is a reasonable way to think about how to set fees potentially. But in the coming slides, I want to walk you through a way of thinking about how to set the fees such that they're within Nexus, within feasible, and more tied to how the city anticipates using any fee revenue that may be collected. Next, please, thank you. And so this is what we're calling a local match or a needs-based approach. And Phil spent some time walking you through some of the projects that are in the pipeline and some of the projects that have been approved. And in many cases, what you see is that local matches are what have pushed the project over the finish line and made them competitive, eligible for and competitive for tax credits and grant funding. So we reviewed a number of recent and past grant applications throughout the county and associated pro formas, and saw that on average, a local match of about 6% of the total project costs can really help ensure that project competitiveness. If you go back to the Nexus study, what we found are that the per unit development costs are estimated to be approximately $613,000, and 6% as a local match of that development cost is $36,780 a unit. Phil also previewed this idea of potentially waiving or deferring impact fees on affordable units. We took a look at your impact fee schedule, and for a high density unit, the aggregate fee burden of your current impact fees is around $11,700 for a high density unit. And so if we take that local match requirement of, call it 37,000 and waive the fees at around 11,700, the balance on average is about $25,000 per unit. If you then hold that thought in your head for a moment and remember that to meet RHNA, the city needs to average about 32 lower income units per year during the 8-year housing element cycle, resulting in an annual need of close to $800,000. That's our 32 units a year multiplied by the $25,000 subsidy per unit. Next slide, please. And then we wanted to think about what level of development activity the city might see in the coming years. And while we can't be sure that future development trends will be the same as they were in the past, it's not an unreasonable assumption. And so we looked at development patterns in the city between 2014 through 2019, and we used them as a proxy for future development activity. So during that period of time, there were 518 units built, representing more than 800,000 square feet of housing, a mix of single family homes, attached single family homes like duplexes, triplexes, et cetera, and 184 apartment units. The size of these units really varied from, and we're really cross-cutting. We saw some very large apartments at 2,800 square feet, for example, and some very small single-family homes at 432 square feet. So we really see a lot of variety there. Next slide, please. And so now before you, we're going to touch on 4 ideas or 4 ways to look at the development activity you've had in the past, assume we would see something similar going forward, and what are different ways we can structure a fee such that we generate that $800,000 a year that the city could then use to offer as a local match for projects. So idea number 1 is to charge a flat fee per square foot on all new housing development. So no exemptions other than the state required exemptions, like an ADU under 750 square feet, for example, is exempt per state statute. But because this fee would apply to all new residential development, the resulting fee is relatively low at $5.88 a square foot. So on the pro side, this results in a pretty low per square foot fee because it's spread across the most new development and very simple to administer. On the con side, you are adding costs potentially to units that might otherwise be naturally affordable, this concept that Phil was describing earlier. And there's no built-in incentive with this concept to incentivize very small or affordable units. Next slide, please. So idea number 2 is similar, charge a flat fee per square foot on all new housing development, but all new housing development above a certain size. So if a unit comes in under 1,000 square feet, it would be completely exempt. If a unit comes in higher than 1,000 square feet, it would pay the fee on all of its square footage. That concept results in a fee that's approximately $6.40 a square foot. Still a relatively low fee per square foot. It does incentivize smaller, more affordable units. We've set that threshold for purposes here at 1,000 square feet. Still simple to administer as well. A potential con is that you might incentivize housing to be built just under the minimum. But if what you're wanting is smaller, more affordable units, maybe that's not a bad thing, but you just might see a little bit of a concentration right there beneath the threshold. And it does place relative to idea number one, a larger fee burden on what are still relatively small homes. Idea number three, thank you. So here, this idea differs from the idea number two in that, yes, we're exempting the 1,000 square feet, but we're exempting the first 1,000 square feet of all new housing. So if you have a unit come in that is 900 square feet, the entire unit would be exempt. If you have an application come in for 1,100 square feet, that applicant would pay on the difference between the proposed size, 1,100, and 1,000 square feet. So they would pay a fee based on 100 square feet. The resulting fee here is approximately $14, close to $15 on all square footage greater than 1,000 square feet. Here, you're definitely incentivizing the smaller units, but you're placing a high cost burden on very large houses. It is still simple to administer and quite straightforward. On the con side, it requires the highest fee per square foot to produce that targeted funding because you're exempting so much square footage that's coming your way. And so this is on the pro side and the con side, but it does place the highest fee burden on the very large houses. So depending on your perspective, pro or con, it's in both columns. And idea number four, please. This is perhaps the more or the most nuanced of the ideas. It's what we're calling the tiered fee structure, where the smallest housing units are exempt, defining those for purposes tonight as under 1,000 square feet, exempt them completely. Moderate sized houses between 1,000 and 2,000 square feet, for example, are charged one relatively low fee per square foot. And then the largest houses are charged a much higher fee per square foot. So it's tiered in that way. It definitely incentivizes the smaller units. It places a high-ish, in the context of this, in this idea, the highest burden on the very large houses. A little bit more complicated to administer, but still, if the rules are clear, fairly straightforward. On the cons, it may incentivize housing to be built just under those minimum thresholds, as with prior ideas. And it places a high fee burden on those large homes. Next, please. And here are just a few examples so that you can see how the options would lay out side by side. If you look, option one is applied the most broadly, resulting in a fee of under $6 a square foot. It applies to everything unless exempt by state statute. Option two requires a slightly higher fee at $6.40, but because we're exempting all those units that are under 1,000 square feet and we still need to reach that annual target of close to 800,000, it's higher than the fee that we just reviewed in option or idea number one. In option three, the fee is higher still because there's even more square footage that's being exempted. And then in option four, this tiered approach, again, units below 1,000 square feet are exempt. Between 1,000 and 2,000 pay actually the lowest fee, as we've been playing around with here in this idea, at $4 a square foot, which in turn requires that the larger homes pay more at $10 a square foot. And there are, Phil mentioned all the potential iterations and variations. There are a few ways you can craft this, and we can talk a little bit more about some of those ideas later tonight if you'd like. And with that, I'll pass it. I'm going to stick around, of course, and I'll pass it back to Phil, though, to facilitate the next part of this.
Thank you, Ashley. All right. Well, now we're going to seek some discussion, seek some input, but remind us back about the toolbox scenario and sort of where some of these ideas come from, and the fact that we don't have to choose just one or any of these ideas, but in general, it's the low and the very low income units that are most challenging to get. And we do see a lot of the affordable by design units already coming through with their ADUs and moderate units. But essentially what we want to look at tonight is this toolbox approach. How can we build our toolbox? How can we get there? How can we get a little closer? We don't have to get 100% there, but how can we continue moving in the right direction. So I do want to open it up for questions at this point. I do have all of those toolbox approach ideas that we can keep going through one by one, and we can kind of break those down. But at this point, I'm going to stop, open it up for questions and have discussion. And then we can get back into each one of those tools to break it down, or even listen to new ideas for that matter.
Thank you, Director. And thank you, Ashley. On the affordable by design, you're saying no discussion, and that's because we've talked about that. We're all in agreement that we want to do that. So there's really nothing to speak about tonight. You just went over that as one of the tools briefly. Is that why that says no discussion?
None. That's correct. That's essentially it. We already have direction to proceed with objective design standards, and we already have the ADU stock plans. So essentially that's already built in as a toolbox feature that we're going to have regardless.
Okay. And a point of clarification, I heard Ashley talk about meeting RENA, and I'd like clarification. My understanding as it currently stands, to meet RENA, we need to make those numbers of units, those 843 spread from very low all the way up to above moderate. We need to make sure that within the city, we have, you know, the space and the zoning for that. We've allocated that. My concern is we're saying meet RENA as though we are required to build that.
We are not mandated to build those units and can't control how the development community works to build those units. What we are required to do is exactly what you said: provide the land, provide the zoning, but also provide policies and a framework to help developers get there. Don't
Yes.
impede it, is what the state says.
Yes.
But at the end of the day, we haven't completed our RENA. They're not going to shut us down. They might give us bonus points if we do it. It does look good. It does actually get us eligible for grants and other things and help with infrastructure and all those things. But that's exactly it. We can't guarantee that we can build those. We just have to make the pathway.
Yep. And so I just wanted that clarification as we go through questions and we start this discussion process. Of course, we would like those units to be built, but we are not required to make that happen. Of course, the state could change their mind in 24 hours and it could be a different story. But right now, meeting it, we've met it in terms of our RENA requirement. What we're now trying to do is help, you know, developers and help the private industry and those in the nonprofit world come forward and build the housing that is needed for a variety of people in our community. So I'm going to make that clear. Okay, so I will look to my council for questions. Councilmember Funk.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you, Phil. Several questions. First of all, when you mentioned grant funding and this being the funding in particular, as I understand it, that is being contributed to create the local match on tax credit financed projects. Does that have to come from the city? Could that also come from the county? Could we get it? Could we find charitable sources or other things that might help with that?
The grantees do like to see it come from a local jurisdiction. That in itself has a separate points category. But also if they do acquire the funds from other private nonprofits or other, it certainly helps. It certainly helps. But the local jurisdiction commitment is a piece of that.
And am I correct in understanding that as the projects from our area are evaluated on this point system, that, you know, this only happens twice a year, right? And that we have been having difficulty getting projects like the Del Rio Ridge project that People Self-Help Housing has proposed here for years, getting those get approved because they're not getting enough points, particularly for local match. Is that a correct understanding?
That's correct. Yes.
Okay. Moving on to some other aspects of this. The ADUs, do they count for arena numbers if somebody builds a small ADU and then uses it as a short-term rental, like on Airbnb, as opposed to using that for rental housing.
State law now does not allow ADUs to be used as a short-term rental. So and just for that reason, and that's why we're allowed to count them as 100% affordable units, all of them, as long as we have in our ordinance, or as long as we require people to comply with the state ordinance, which prohibits the use of a short-term vacation rental in an ADU.
Okay. This is really a question for Ashley. In your slide on development trends, which I don't know if we can go back to that. It's several back. Sorry.
Forward.
Let's see, was it in Ashley's portion or my portion? I forget.
It was. Keep going just a little bit more.
Forward.
Yep. After this. Here we go. Oh, next one. Yeah.
Yes.
This one.
Okay.
Here we are.
I knew I'd seen that. Okay. So when we're looking at those residential development trends, and you're assuming that there would be an ongoing production in those same values, have you accounted for what's built out and not built out in our various zoning categories in town? We don't have any big spots of flat land that developers like to do a big tract of housing.
Phil, I'm wondering if you or Rochelle want to take that question. You look closely at this permit data as well.
I apologize. I was trying to have Bill look something up. What was the question?
So the question is in this residential development trends analysis, looking at how many units might get built, have we accounted, does that account for the availability of land in various zoning categories, what's built out and not built out in our community already?
This was not. This was just historical data from 2014 through 2019. We chose that period to match our arena. There's nothing special about it, but we did needed an easy data set to get a proxy of what has historically been built recently. So we didn't necessarily look at, hey, there's more available land of this type or that type. Certainly when we did our housing element and looked at what is out there, there is enough land to do 518 units, over a 6-year period. There are those parcels out there.
Okay. That'll do on that. I think, let me check my stickies here. Yes, okay. On the staff report on page 81, that's the needs-based analysis summary. So where you take that $613,000 cost. First of all, I want to check in. When we looked at this Nexus study earlier, my recollection is that the cost at that time several months ago was about $575,000. We're 580. And so that's gone up. And I was wondering if that increase is largely in construction costs or what accounts for that difference. And apologies that I didn't ask that earlier.
I'm going to have Ashley answer that question.
I wish I could answer that question. When we first presented the development costs, the numbers haven't changed since we reported these to you in October. There may have been another presentation for another project at some point that had those development costs. So I can't speak to that, the delta between 585 and 613,000. I can speak to the fact that as I am speaking with developers across the state and in San Luis Obispo County and in your region, development costs are really jeopardizing a lot of projects right now. They are higher right now than they were when this meeting started an hour and 15 minutes ago. They've been increasing very, very quickly. And so I wouldn't be surprised if that explains some of the reason, but I can't speak to the 585,000 estimate.
Okay, thank you. I do recall that 5 Jaws up here at the floor when you first offered that estimate. And that we did get confirmation from Ken Trujillo of People's Self-Help Housing, who was on the call, telling us that that was indeed a real number. And other cities in the area have had similar numbers. So I'm not questioning the number. I just want to understand it. And then secondly, as we're looking at that model, which takes our, that 613,000 and looks at what local match is needed, and then what we'd accomplished with a fee waiver, how much else there is. Have we accounted for in that the extent to which some of this burden could be handled by ADUs, for which the city doesn't necessarily need to do a local match?
So yes, when we came up with the 31.75 units, that accounted for about 10 or so ADUs per year. So if you take the number of very low and extremely low units, divide that by 8, it comes around to the 42 number. We dropped that down to 32. We have been doing a lot of ADUs lately. Bill was talking to me this afternoon and did indicate that we're doing a better clip than the 20, because as we said, we can only count 50% of them right now. So we could do better on that and may not have that target be as high. Of course, we could do worse also. So
Sure. So would it be an option for us as one of our tools in our kit to add a tool that is about additional promotions or other things that we might do to help people doing smaller ADUs? I know we already exempt them from all the fees, and we'll have a couple of really cool models coming in of stock plans that are under that 750-foot range. But would it still be a policy option for us to look at promoting those smaller ADUs in some fashion and getting some additional portion of that burden met through investment that people voluntarily make because it's profitable for them to do that on their own properties?
we will certainly be doing a promotional effort of the stock plans of the program, regardless of whether it's in the policy or not, just to try and encourage those. I don't know necessarily that it needs to be in any kind of ordinance or policy. I just need you guys to say, hey, we want to let people know these tools are available to try and encourage those ADUs.
Sure, but we would have the option, if in looking at our toolkit, of thinking about that as one of the ways that maybe we could take a little bit of this burden off of our collect numbers. Okay, thank you.
Are you complete? Thank you. Other council questions?
Okay.
Councilmember Borba.
Yeah, I was hesitating because I have numerous questions. Fortunately, though, the mayor already kind of addressed one of them, and Councilmember Funk already addressed one. But to follow on to the mayor's question about RENA consequences, is there any, from a RENA perspective or from state perspective, any minimum description of what a house is? Because I see in the consultant's report focus on a 900 square foot unit. And I was curious about the cost there as well, because it talks about 613,000, which, given recent price rises, probably, coincides well with the 575 that was mentioned at the last meeting. But we had the Grand Oaks. I asked Rochelle this morning if she knew what those sold for, and she looked it up, said that a 703 square foot one sold for 457. And so I was curious how we get to 613 for a 900 square foot apartment as opposed to a freestanding unit in Grand Oaks. My point being, and my question being, that it seems that Grand Oaks is able to produce and sell a house on the market for less than what we're describing in here as the kind of base level of cost. Can you or
Yes,
Ashley explain
I
that
was,
deceiving discrepancy?
I had the same question you did. And I understand that cost includes the profit margins for the developer and all the other aspects of that. But Ashley, would you like to weigh in on that as well a little bit?
Sure. And we detail this out in the Nexus study. There's a table that shows how we build up those cost estimates on a line item by line item basis. It is inclusive of the cost of land. The direct costs are include site preparation site preparation costs, which take into account the topography, and various adjustments that have to be, retaining walls and that sort of thing that may be necessary in some places. Of course, there's the direct cost, including prevailing wage assumptions, parking construction cost, and prepping the site for parking. Indirect costs are
I understand.
high.
You don't need to go through all that. I mean, I understand in reading the table, it made sense. But the contrast is that on Grand Oaks, building on the side of a hill, they're producing these 700 to 900 square foot units starting, at 457. Now, you did mention one thing, prevailing wage, which I assume they did not have to pay. Did you mention that because, if these kind of things are built by, let's say, a people's self-help housing or something like that, that they have to pay prevailing wage because they're using federal tax credits and grants?
Correct.
Okay.
I think
So
it's also challenging to know exactly the land cost basis that various developers or applicants bring to the table. That can be a big assumption as well. It can really vary from project to project.
Okay. And back to my question regarding minimum description of a house. And the reason I ask, it's a follow-on to Councilmember Funk's question of, I get very concerned that in California, we tend to do this thing of, you read these articles all the time, like in big cities where it costs $500,000 for, to build a unit to house somebody who was previously homeless. And it's like, you're never even going to do a dent or a drop in the bucket with that kind of a, accepting that as a valid number. And it seems that Councilmember Funk asked about smaller ADUs. I mean, if we want to achieve affordability in a high housing cost market, you got to build small. You got to think small, build small. And there's nothing that would preclude us from somehow incentivizing, and this is a question, I assume there's nothing to preclude us from somehow incentivizing smaller, let's say ADUs, that'll probably never get down to the very low, and certainly not the extremely low, but would get down into the, the low, being considered affordable for the low income category.
Absolutely, we can do that. Now, if we really want to use more of them than what the state's giving us now, which is 50% of all ADUs in the low, we have to do this study and come up with thresholds for what size can get us there. And I think that's very plausible. We can certainly do that.
Because you made the comment, Phil, and I know we're not talking too much about affordable by design, but you made a comment that affordable by design does not mean lower quality. And my question was, why not? I mean, my first house that we bought in this community was 900 square feet. It was built in 1930, and in 1985, it was definitely not of high quality. And yet it was great for us, in our 20s to be able to own this house, right? And I get concerned that we have in our mind that we're not, that everything's got to be high quality. It's like, no, I mean, you take lower quality cabinets or lower quality floors or whatever. That's what you do when you're young and you're struggling to get into the market. So I'm wondering, there's no particular requirement in anything we do to require high quality, right?
There is not, and it doesn't have to be higher quality. That's the thing. And quality doesn't have to mean the quality of the construction and the walls. It can mean I've got less windows. It means I've got different windows. It means I have a comp roof, not a tile roof. It means I have vinyl on my floor instead of tile. So that, it's certainly.
Okay. And then in relation to Grand Oaks, you showed a chart on here that they had 3 deed restricted, moderate, income units and 27 market rate units that also penciled out, as we're discussing price wise, to be moderate. Why with a development like that, with those categories, would we require? I realize we made a discretionary zoning or, legislative action as the city council to allow them to build. And so they didn't have an inherent right to do that. But is that why we required them to have moderate when they were going to be moderate by market rate anyway?
It was a planned development, so they have to make certain findings to do a planned development, and that includes doing some deed restricted units. And also, we didn't know what those units would be selling at and couldn't guarantee it. It did turn out that they are in those affordable by design categories, which is great.
Right. Although they're probably a lot more than they were. They're selling for a lot more now, I assume, than what they were projected to when they were.
The project developed at the right time.
Yeah. Okay, and then there's some comments that'll wait till later. The development impact fees, you mentioned that they're and I think Rochelle had mentioned this to you, they're already insufficient to provide, build the infrastructure we need to serve new residents, right?
Yes.
So if we waived those, that would be a deliberate policy decision, but it would make it that much harder for us to build the new infrastructure needed for new residents.
Exactly.
Okay. And then, and when you talk about, needing to generate about $800,000 a year to help support, trying to get 32 low and very low units per year. And you talked about city money for that. Just to clarify for the public, that's not general fund dollars. When we talk about that, that would be money coming from an inclusionary housing fee or affordable housing fee or however we describe it, right?
That's correct. It comes from an affordable housing or inclusionary housing fund.
Right. Okay. And then on a chart here, you had a chart, and I think I'm going to go to page 172 in the staff report where I think it's here. Yeah, it shows on page 172 and 173. And I think you had a chart in here on the presentation showing that from 2003 to 2007, a certain number of units were constructed under our inclusionary housing policy, but that from 2008 to 2020, virtually none were. In other words, no very lows, one low, two moderates, for a total of 3 units over a 12-year period, which would kind of imply that that's not an effective tool. But then on the next page, you show Grand Oaks, Hartburg, and Principal mixed use is generating a total of 3 very low, 9 low, 10 moderates. Is there something that's changed that we went from producing virtually none over a 12-year period under this policy to having 3 projects that are generating what may not be significant in the scheme of things, but is more significant relative to the past?
The Great Recession.
Okay.
That's the black
Okay.
hole it left us for some years.
Gotcha.
And the affordability factors of development. So
And-
yeah, there
and
just weren't a lot of projects in general for quite some time,
Okay.
for a 5-year gap.
I was also wondering in the sense that these 3 projects required a specific legislative action on the part of the council, and
That as
we
well.
weren't
We're able
getting
to
a lot of
mandate it for those projects because they're planned developments that asked for all these different zoning variations.
Okay, gotcha. And somewhere you had a chart in here. You talked about some prospective projects that.
I can bring that up.
Right, and that you specifically listed like the people self-help one, and where they had somebody had requested a certain amount of city affordable housing fee funds. I think that was it there.
Yes.
Right. And what puzzled me about this is proportionality, and that Del Rio Ridge is asking for $400K for 42 low units, which is a $10,000 or less than $10,000 per unit subsidy. But California Manor is asking for $2 million for 95 units, which is over $200,000 a unit in requested subsidy. Are they just asking, so, no harm, no foul, and, ask for the moon?
Yeah, I couldn't tell you the why they're asking so much more. They are different groups. They are
Okay.
different developers. It is a different product. And they maybe have different performance, but I couldn't tell you exactly why. But yeah,
Okay.
they're asking for a lot.
Yeah, because based upon what you and Ashley talked about, you're talking about a city subsidy of maybe $36,000, of which could be 25 affordable housing fee coming out of affordable housing fee pot, and 11,000 in waived development impact fees. So this, did seem out of whack.
Can
Okay,
I also just add one thing? Del Rio Ridge, first of all, has not been able to actually win the tax credit program.
Mhm.
And the other thing is that they also have a county match. So the county, there are some county funds in there. So both the county and the city do count as towards the local match. And so they have some funds from the county to add to that 400,000.
that's good to know, and good to know that the county is stepping up in that regard as well. I think this is my last question, just to be clear, because I understand like the Paso does not have an inclusionary housing ordinance where they assess fees.
They do not, but they do offer a fee deferment program for a affordable housing project that gets points. So I did sit down and speak with the Paso Robles Housing Authority, and that's the primary thing that City of Paso does, is offer those long-term loans
Okay.
for the fee, for the development impact fees.
There's, so the question is though, there's no requirement to have an inclusionary housing ordinance or policy in terms of meeting our, in our housing element, or meeting our requirements of dealing with HCD, or there's not a requirement to have that?
No.
Or did we didn't promise to have that in our housing element, right?
No, the policy that I showed you is our a quote unquote promise. It's not a promise. It's simply saying, here's a tool, here's an approach to getting there. And so we're not mandated to have that whatsoever. We're trying to simply come up with pathways to get there.
One last thing on the state density bonus, which it seems some of our more recent developments have done. Is that also a reason why we're seeing less deed restricted housing under our own inclusionary housing policy?
Yes, because it's
Okay.
an automatic
That's right.
that the city has to go with.
And in doing that, it seems that the state has actually recognized that, allowing more density will result in more and smaller and more affordable
Yes.
units. Okay.
The other big piece of it, though, is the fact that the state now requires that when we prepare our housing element, that we demonstrate that we have a very, that we can meet our RENA through areas that can be built by right. In other words, we have to designate certain housing areas that can be built by right without discretionary approval
Mhm.
outside of a density bonus. So that alone really takes us out of being able to control a lot of these affordability levels.
Right. Well, it's just refreshing. I mean, it kind of imposes, in some cases, burdens on the city, but it's at least refreshing. State recognize that more and smaller leads to more affordable units, notwithstanding that housing unfortunately does not pay its way for city services. All right, I have comments, but those are all my questions. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Phil.
Thank you. Other council questions? Seeing none at this time. I've got a few myself, Phil. The state density bonus, it seems that most of the affordable units that are built under the state density bonus fall into the moderate range, has been my understanding. But when I saw the slide, it seems that they have requirements for low and very low. So what's actually the state density bonus law, and what's happening in reality?
So the reality is, in the past, yes, most of our projects have been in that moderate category. I'll pull up the slide that I had here, but things have changed. As of the recent changes to state density bonus law in 2020 and 2021, they now are really incentivizing the low and very low. They have a whole bunch of charts that I can probably pull up if I can get to them that show all these different levels of affordability and the numbers of units that basically trigger different density bonus amounts and trigger their allowance for different concessions and different waivers, all at different levels. So it varies quite a bit, but it's all catered towards now low and very low. So I think starting last year and moving forward, these density bonus projects are going to have automatically, based on state law, more low and very low rather than moderate, because moderate won't get them very far in terms of asking for the concessions and getting the bonus. Won't get them enough.
It's surprising they didn't do that earlier. So if we look at the potential of this to produce some low and very low, does that help to offset the numbers that we're trying to help subsidize? And has that been taken into consideration here? Or is that just something we know and we take that into our decision-making process?
These don't produce real numbers. This is a pathway, but we can't guarantee that someone's going to utilize these. So it's not definitive. But Ashley, do you want to weigh in on that factor?
I think, I mean, looking at the development trends over the past period of time, it's really just uncertain what we're going to get. We don't know how many applications, we don't know what size they'll be, we don't know where they'll be, or if they will want to avail themselves of the state density bonus. It's really hard to say. So it's like the city manager said, we're just using those past trends as a proxy for what we might see. I wish I could say with more certainty that all of this has been taken into account. We just don't know the type and nature of applications that we'll be getting.
Okay. So if we look at this, so at least 5% very low, 10% low, then we've got the 10% for sale, common interest development, restricted to the moderate income. And then we've got, so these are different options they can take, or they can apply all of these, or is it kind of a menu?
This is just a sample of the many different options that are available through the state density bonus program. So I brought out the most common. There's many other categories that they can pick and choose from for different types of affordable housing and different levels that get them different levels of bonuses or different levels of concessions and waivers. There's probably 100 different combinations that could be chosen.
Okay, so I don't need to know all of the combinations, but it seems like then developers could still just go with moderate and not include low or very low. That's not being required. It's just an option within the many options that the state's offering with their density bonus.
Correct. If they just chose moderate, they're only going to get a small bonus and they're only going to get to ask for one waiver. In other words, they could say, all right, I'm going to build my building a little bit higher and I'm going to get to be able to add, 1 unit to my 20 unit project.
Okay. So it's likely if we look at the advantages they do get, by, say they get 3 waivers and they, they can get more and more. It sounds like to get what they used to get with only moderate, a developer would now need to do some low and very low. There's some other things that are going to have to take place. It's not the same as it was 2 years ago.
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct. So it is better. It has greater incentives, but it is also more geared towards low and very low.
Okay. And Councilmember Borbo, you had a question on this
I
slide?
did on this slide, and thank you. I think you've addressed part of it, and that is that the mayor just asked, this is different than it used to be a few years ago. These are a higher level of detail in terms of what the state's asking for.
Yes.
And you can pick, as if you're a developer, you could pick one of these things and you would get the bonus indicated.
Correct.
You could say, you don't have to do all these things. You could say, I'm going to do number 1 there. I give you 20% more units.
Yeah.
Okay. And I think you were actually alluded to, though, that, because of these different restrictions, they may or may not pencil out. A developer may go, gee, if I got to do, something for very low here, it just still doesn't pencil out. I'm not going to build it. So this additional level of detail might help produce some additional low or very low units, but it might just discourage developers from building at all then, if it doesn't pencil out.
Possible. Certainly. There's all sorts of different avenues we could look at this, but if you have this in addition to paying down impact fees, in addition to, another factor, it might get there. through a combination.
Okay, thank you.
All right, do I get questions back now? I've got, yeah, okay. I want to know how you said Paso Robles uses the fee deferral program. And I'm curious how that really makes it affordable. I understand when you are a for-profit builder, that if you are deferring fees, that gives you time to bring in the profits and start to pay that down. But if you're a nonprofit building affordable housing, how does deferring that, when now, once you've built it, you're trying to get a pot of money for the next affordable, project, does it really ever get paid back? Does it make more sense to, if you're going to do something with that, does it make more sense to waive it than it does to defer it and really end up costing, the city less in the long run, because we're not trying to administer something that really is never going to be paid back?
They seem to give equal weight, in their opinion, to a deferral as to a full waiver, because the time of deferral is such a length of time. I think in Paso, I think they said it was 20 years. So it's such a long time and no interest collected till the very end that it's far outside of their window for their next project. So it was the same difference.
But how often are they paid back?
I don't have that history. I don't know.
Okay, that would be interesting to know, because if they really don't end up being paid back, or they're deferred another 20 years and they just keep being deferred, are we really just deferring and not getting the money in? And does it make sense to just be, let's say, honest from the get-go that these fees are going to be waived? So, and maybe we don't have that answer tonight.
And part of the question might also be too that, and I didn't get this clarified, is perhaps a deferral does not trigger the prevailing wage construction of the project. And perhaps only the waiver does. I don't have the answer for that question tonight, but it is one of those assumptions.
It's an assumption. What would it take for us to confirm that?
We can make a phone call to some of our local nonprofit developers in the coming week. I mean, obviously we can't get an answer tonight. There may be other things. A lot of times these projects have a lot of other matching funds.
That's the thing, because
I'm not sure if the tax credit in and of itself.
Yeah, you can sit here and think, okay, if it's deferred, the 11,000 is deferred, does that then reduce the cost of it by 20%? But then if they're getting other money, or even other money from us, but it seems like the preferred route would be, let's defer the fee, not have prevailing wage, and then it brings down the cost, and then it truly is more affordable, and not just trying to throw money at something to make it affordable, which really doesn't make a lot of sense.
We would be guessing, because right now I don't think just us.
My guess
deferring
is
would help.
no.
Yeah, me too.
Let's see. I think it was our city manager. One of you mentioned that we don't allow short-term rentals on ADUs. That's for the ADUs going forward under the new state law as of, was that 2021? That's past ADUs, they can do that. But if they're taking advantage of any of the new, waived fees, no fees under 750 square feet, that type of thing, or the JADU, that those are then considered not available for short-term rental.
It was starting in 2021 that the state said that all new ADUs could not be used for vacation rentals. So the assumption is, and the state hasn't clarified this, and we don't want to ask them, that prior to that, those ADUs that have already been built and established could be. And the other loophole there that most cities are using is that it doesn't mean the primary house couldn't be used as a vacation rental.
Right.
And the ADU be used as the
right. So if somebody builds an ADU for themselves, they live in that, and then they short-term rental their
and that's
house.
happening as well. And that's fine.
Of course. Councilmember Warbo mentioned, quality, and I think when we talk about quality, we're talking more from a quality project, so that from the outside, it is a quality project. We're not saying that you have to have granite countertops and marble flooring. Yeah, you can have linoleum, you can have Formica, things like that in an affordable unit, but from the outside, we want that to be a quality project for the city. Is that, am I understanding that correctly?
Absolutely. And that's where objective design standards come into play. That's where design review comes into play. And a project can be designed and placed and sited on a site and done and still be a very cost-effective project to be built.
I think this question is for Ashley. The moderate, the gap analysis, particularly for moderate income, does that account for any equity that, you know, potential buyers would have from, you know, maybe their first home was a 800 square foot condo that they've had for, you know, 5 or 10 years, and now they're selling that and they're taking that equity and putting that into something else? Or is this always assuming that somebody is a first-time home buyer?
It does not make any overt assumptions about equity that may be put forward into the purchase of a second home. Not a second, you know, a next home, not a second home.
Right, yeah, the next home. Okay, so really the numbers we look at are, you know, the worst numbers you could possibly see because it doesn't account for, you know, some other potentials. Okay. I'm curious about the implied maximum, particularly on the rentals. I wasn't exactly sure what that meant. Like, I understand the concept of it, but would that be instead of a fee, you would say, you know, okay, let's just take the 2-bedroom. You could say that either you'd have this, and I realize this is a maximum fee that we're not talking about, but either you could have this maximum fee or you could have an inclusionary requirement of so many moderate units. Is that what that implied maximum inclusionary requirement means? You could say it's one or the other.
Correct. There's really different statutory authorization for an impact fee program versus an inclusionary program. And so what we did was a Nexus study to support the adoption of an impact fee. But if you were to go the route of an inclusionary program, and it's all in the mix tonight, we're talking about all of it, that would be the implied, that's what the inclusionary requirement would need to be to fully mitigate the impacts. So when we talk about an inclusionary requirement of 10% or 15%, just looking at the slide ahead of you, that may be an appropriate policy, but you wouldn't be fully mitigating the impact per this Nexus. But just in the way that the maximum Nexus or the Nexus justified maximum fees are quite high, this inclusionary requirement is the equivalent of that quite high fee. So it would be appropriate to bring that down.
Let's see, I'm curious about if we talk about not charging fees on some of the more affordable, you know, as a potential. So we're looking at this fee, and okay, if you're more than 1,000, which somebody called 1,000 square feet a very large home, I would disagree. And I think anyone that's got 2 or more people in a household, especially if you're working from home, 1,000 is not very large. So just to clarify that. But instead of, I'm just kind of thinking of ideas, instead of not applying that fee, could you apply that fee, but then waive it and have that be part of that 6% match for someone like a People's Self-Help Housing?
So typically you would not, you know what, I'm going to leave this to Ashley because
you know what I'm trying to do here, right?
Yes, I am. Absolutely. Ashley, do you know that?
I think that's a really creative idea that I would like to think some more about. I do not have a ready answer. I see the strategy.
Okay. All right.
It's a very interesting idea.
All right. I'm going to put a big maybe with a circle around it next to my
I was really hoping Rochelle was going to take that one.
I can hear legislation being drawn up right now. Let's see. The last thing I really wanted to ask, Phil, you talked about the state requiring a study to determine affordability of affordable by design. I just love that we're spending more money to say that something's inexpensive enough. What does that actually look like? And is that an ongoing, paperwork and qualifications that we need to meet where we're, out there, checking on all the projects and making sure that they are affordable and reporting on that, something like SB 1383, and then we're having a half-time employee just to do all of that work?
So what it looks like is we do have to look at our market, our current market, what are houses going for in our market, and what truly type of housing fits those affordable categories. What would it have to be like from a design standpoint? So we'd have to come up with some examples based on the current market and trends, and basically write HCD and say, here's our proposals, here's our design standards for units that we believe fit these affordable by design categories. Will you bless it? So it is a bit of a work. Right now, we're in a bit of a grace period where HCD has said you can use your ADUs for that, but they have told us that your next housing cycle or prior to that, we're going to come back to you and we're going to want some justification. Or we're going to want justification for your projects like Grand Oaks. You can use it. We're not going to question it right now, but later on, we may need some more justification. They haven't asked for it yet. So I don't know where that's going to go, but they've indicated that that will be coming in the future so that we can't just arbitrarily say, hey, we believe this 2,500 square foot house, it's got a view, but it's not a great view, but it's still.
Well, yeah, no, understand that. So we could say, hey, the criteria is, let's take this 613,000, which is, I think most of us would think is somewhat insane, but there we go. But if we take that, 900 square foot or 2-bedroom, or there's certain criteria where we say if it meets this criteria or less than, then it's considered affordable. Like, I'm just thinking if the state comes back, this arena cycle goes through 2028. That could be a lot of work on the city to try to go back, 8+ years of housing that's been built and try to determine if things were affordable and get all that information. I'm wondering, is there something we can be doing as we go along? Do we have any sense of what that might be? And I don't know if Ashley would know that.
I have a sense it's more about going forward rather than looking back. It's more about what do we predict over the next 5 years, or even this year, where the housing prices are and what truly is selling and renting at these particular categories. So we'd have to do a market study based on the current things that are happening now.
So we're not going to have to go back and prove anything. It's more of moving
We take a look
forward.
at, for example, the Grand Oaks project is selling units right now. Here's what size they are. Here's what they're selling for. Here's what they're renting for. Here's why we can demonstrate clearly that that design is meeting the categories. And then we can use that going forward.
Okay. All right. Thank you. That makes sense. And I think I captured, I was curious, just California Manor, are they looking to expand and add units, or are they taking it from one type of housing to another that would add those units? What exactly is the
They
potential
want
there?
to expand. They want to build a whole new building on the back of their property.
That's
on a
right. Okay.
Portion of land back there.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Councilmember Funk, I think I saw you have more questions.
Yes, thank you. Could you go back to the density bonus thing? Slide for a second. I wanted to follow up on the mayor's questions on that. If a unit, and let's use California Manor as an example, since that already came through design review, maybe. Does the fact that, am I correct in recalling that project qualified for a number of bonus because they're looking to build a unit that's would be 100% low and very low and moderate units, as I recall?
Yes, they did qualify for a density bonus, and they qualified for concessions and waivers. So they were asking for significant parking reductions and some other development standard reductions as based on the density bonus program at the state.
Sure, open space waiver and height, maybe, as I recall.
Yes.
That, and the fact that they are using the density bonus program and qualifying for waivers does not mean that the project isn't also seeking the local match so that they can do the tax credit financing to make the project happen, right?
Correct.
And do we know for the Del Rio Ridge, how much else that has to go? I mean, we know that it's got 400,000 in match that we've pledged to it, and the county's pledged some. How much more are they going to have to get there?
Not
So
sure.
in my discussions with Ken, they have been just missing with their existing match. The last couple of tax credit cycles have been very, very competitive. Certainly with the match that they have now, if they had applied 2-3 years ago, they would have qualified and won. So it's hard. It's an art. He doesn't have an exact number, but they continue to keep applying and looking for creative ways to get there.
Okay. And coming back to the question of the various options that we have, if we need to fund some of this through fees on housing, reflecting the service requirements of particularly larger homes. Would we have the option of taking one of these fees that might be fairly substantial when you get to bigger houses, but waiving a portion of that if it's going to be if that home is owner occupied for a period of time?
I don't think I quite understood your question. I'm sorry.
Okay, so the question, basically what I'm getting at is, I'm hearing from real estate agents and others that it's hard for them, when they're representing buyers to get homes because those homes are being snatched up by investors who then may want to use those homes for short-term rental housing or other things. And our families are getting aced out of the market by because of the investment character of housing into the detriment of our community as a whole. So I'm wondering if there's the option we have some fees that would be pretty hefty on new larger homes, but would we be able to waive some of that for owner occupied housing?
It's a possibility. What most communities do instead is they have a vacation rental ordinance that has different limitations on the number of vacation rentals in your community and all sorts of other things tied to that and costs associated with it. But that could be tried. It's difficult to monitor those houses, and then you'd end up putting a deed restriction on it and that sort of thing. So it certainly is an option.
Okay, thank you.
Any other council questions at the moment? All right, I'm not seeing any. So what I'd like to do, Phil, is there something more that you were going to report on before we go to public comment?
No.
Okay. What I would like to do, we're at 8 o'clock, just about on the dot here, is have us take a break, 7:59. Why don't we take a 10-minute break and come back and we'll go right into public comment. Thank you. All right, let's go ahead and bring us back. Oh, there you go. All right, so council has just returned from a brief break, and we will now go to public comment on this item. So anyone who is here in the chambers, feel free to step up to the podium. If you're on the webinar, you can raise your hand. And if you're on the phone, *9. And we'll go with our first in-chambers speaker. Welcome.
Good evening once again, Council. Jeff Oslin. I believe it's on Ashley's presentation on the Nexus, page 2. If we could bring that up, I have some questions that I'm confused about. If possible, Phil.
Yes, hold on, got to pull my screen back up. I'll be there in just a moment.
Thank
Bear
you.
with me.
No problem.
Give him an extra moment while I get there. Sorry, if you want to not count his time until because it might take me a minute here.
I'll consider it.
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Yes, the answer should have asked the mayor. I'm sorry. Okay, there we go. All right, now I got to the right screen. For some reason, the presentation got closed
While
out
you're
on me.
doing that, I could actually go on a little bit, but I believe on that number, it showed, and I'll pick on the
Oh.
750 square foot part of that graph. It said what the rent was, and I believe it was $22.50. I've been doing a lot of research on housing lately, including rentals countywide. And not an exact science, but a 2-bedroom normally goes for about 2,500 to 3,000 now at 750 square feet. Yeah, that's the perfect one right there. And we're at 2,200. It seems awfully high if we're talking about Atascadero. The next, and especially like a brand new ADU that might be rented out to folks not on short-term rental. The average price on that's going for about 2,500. If that was built out really nice, it goes for about 3,000 a month. And I'm comparing also 2 exact units in San Luis Obispo. One was just built brand new, and that square footage is higher than that, but the square footage on it's going for about 4,600 a month, and the same exact square footage of an older unit goes for about 2,600 a month. So if they are modernized and very nice, the rents are up. So I don't understand how things could be affordable there, and that's where I kind of go with that confusing part of where that is. The second thing is build out cost. An average ADU in Atascadero being hooked into the sewer is around $150,000 to build out 750 square feet. If you're going on the septic, you're going to be a little higher, but that's the numbers that I am pretty well familiar with. So I'm just questions for Ashley, if possible, to clarify where those numbers are really coming from. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other speakers on this item? Let me get back over the webinar. And if there's any of our attendees that would like to speak, please press the raise hand icon at the bottom of the screen. Anyone on the phone, Luke? No. Anyone in here wanting to speak? Seeing none, I'm seeing no one on the webinar, so we'll close public comment and bring it back to council and staff. Ashley, do you have an answer for Mr. Oslin on the rental rates seeming high in Atascadero, and even looking maybe at the cost of ADUs and maybe not taking into consideration maybe a more realistic cost for our city?
To the second question first, we were really costing out this prototype that we described, the 900 square foot 2-bedroom. So we did not look into that for ADUs specifically, but fees in general are captured under the soft cost assumption in our the pro forma that we laid out. I'm not sure that I totally followed the size and the rent numbers that the speaker just presented. I was trying to write them down and didn't capture them exactly. At the time that we prepared this study, we were looking at Redfin and apartment.com and other publicly available sources trying to get at realistic market rate rents. We always want to the extent possible, look at the most recently constructed product because we want it to be as reflective of possible of new construction that's coming our way, as opposed to the inventory in general as it stands right now. So I didn't jot down those numbers quite quickly enough to speak specifically, but it was based on research in the market at the time we were preparing this several months ago
research in the
now.
market at the time, and really you're looking at brand new construction, which really it does start to speak to the fact that, one of the things I asked was, does this take any of this take into consideration that people have equity? No, it doesn't. It doesn't take into consideration that you have people in that lower or moderate that are moving up to the moderate or the higher moderate, and they're releasing other inventory. That certainly doesn't count as arena, but we also don't even look at it as though that's an available option out there. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think we're talking about two different parts of the presentation in some ways, but as we were forecasting the number of units we would need to provide each year, it wasn't as detailed as some of these questions are making room for.
I think just some of the, when we look at all of this, we're looking at the absolute highest numbers. We're looking at this $613,000 number for 900 square feet. And I think what most people would do is look at that and say, okay, this isn't really, how do I say this? This isn't, it's really not sustainable. You've got government saying, hey, we want to make things more affordable. Let's throw more money at it, which makes it more expensive. And then we've got to throw money at it to make it. So that logic doesn't really work, but that's what we're stuck with. But we also don't take into consideration older products that are freed up when people move on. We don't take into consideration that people at a moderate income level or even a lower income level might have some equity. We're going with the absolute worst possible case scenario. That's just how all of this kind of seems to play out, because it's, obviously the easiest information to find, and it's what we have available. What I would like to do now is we're going to provide staff some feedback. We do not need to make a motion tonight unless we're coming and deliberating on something and deciding that there is something we want to make a motion on. Otherwise, we're going to go through the 4 tools. And, this first one, really doesn't require much conversation, but we're going to go through the other tools and simply provide feedback to staff, not coming to a motion. So let's go, 1 through 4, affordability by design. Is there anything in here? We don't really need to discuss it, but anything anybody needed to say about affordability by design? I've got a hand with Councilmember Funk, and then I'll go to Councilmember Borbeau.
I was wondering, before we dive into the very specifics about tools, if the mayor would be open to a more general comment. And that is that, the question of to what extent do we really need to try to meet the RENA numbers? Would it be valuable to our community to have those numbers be met? And I wanted to alert this body, since we talked recently about the countywide homelessness action plan, that that strategic plan does assume that the RENA targets will be met proportionately by time in every jurisdiction. And it's still not really enough. But one can see from these numbers why there's such an emphasis in that plan on creating new, lower cost, non-traditional housing options so that people have a way to move out of homelessness to something that doesn't cost $600,000 to build, and can at least have some time to stabilize their lives in something that a troop of Boy Scouts could build in an afternoon. So we have those, a range of other things there, but we do assume that those RENA targets are met because the housing market countywide for lower income housing market is extraordinarily tight. And so adding new vouchers to help people be able to afford a unit typically often means that someone else then can't find housing and falls out of housing and becomes homeless. So we have to find ways to expand that pool of housing. So it's kind of, if we're going to be able to get a handle on that problem, to create enough spaces that folks can move up, as the mayor was describing. You know, somebody from homeless who's coming out of homelessness is not going to be in a fancy new unit, but they, you know, might be in an older apartment that was that somebody vacated to be able to take on a new ADU, that kind of thing. So we've got to have some substantial additional supply in the market at the lower income levels.
And I don't think nobody disagrees with that. That's why we're having this conversation tonight. So what I was clarifying at the very beginning is I want to be careful with our wording, that we're not saying we are required to do this. We want to. This is why we're here talking about it. But I wanted to make that clarification.
Understood.
So,
I think both of those points hold, that it's not at this point legally required. And also that there are substantial reasons that it might be valuable to our community to come closer to the ideal of the people who work here can afford to live here, and or can live here, and the people who live here can work here, which is, we're working on both ends of that.
right. Again, that's why we're
Yes.
having this conversation.
Exactly.
So I think we're
Yes.
on the same page with that. So
Okay.
are we ready to go through the tools?
Yes.
Okay,
That-
wonderful. Thank you for clarifying what you're talking about, HSOC and those assumptions. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Okay, so affordability by design, Councilmember Borbo.
Yeah, I had a question on this, and I think you might have addressed it, Phil, for me, and that is, there's no minimum size for a unit, right? Other than you got to meet building code, you can't have a 3-foot square bathroom or something. But in terms of when you say here, design standards can build in incentives, bonuses, et cetera. What about incentives for building a smaller unit? So like, somebody builds a 40-unit apartment complex. Is there any incentive for them to include a few 400 square foot studio units that, would be affordable by design?
There's not right now anything like that. And so those are the kinds of things that we're discussing when we talk about objective design standards, and when we talk about, maybe redoing our zoning in the future after our general plan to come up with something that's called fractional density, which is looking at bedroom counts and unit sizes as density. For example, a very small unit might count as only a portion of your density, whereas a very large unit with multiple bedrooms may actually count as 2 units or 2.5 units. Doing those kinds of things can get you there and create affordability by design through policy and through standards.
Okay, interesting, because that's kind of what I'm thinking about in my head. So without committing to that tonight, though, that is something that could be considered under this middle bullet here?
Yes.
All right, thank you.
I think what most of us have said is that anything you can be looking at and incentivizing in this area, we're very much in favor of. Particularly, as Councilmember Borbo said, if there is some sort of incentive that can bring about those low and very low units, would be even better. Any other discussion on that item? And I've got to keep looking at my screen. Mark, Councilmember Dares, if you've ever got your hand raised and I'm not seeing you, feel free to take yourself off the microphone and say, hey, Mayor.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Do we need, on that affordable by design, do we need to do anything with regard to encouraging the smaller lot size? I know we did some kind of a variation for or exception for Grand Oaks Paseo, so that those are actually small lots that are owned. Or is that something we're going to address in the general plan?
So when I mention objective design standards, it also comes along with small lot subdivision standards, which will be a policy that will allow small lots by right, and as long as they're consistent with density, so that somebody wouldn't have to do a plan development rezoning in order to get those smaller lots, as long as they meet certain design objectives for their project.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so I think you have everything you need from us, Director, on item 1. All right. So item 2, fee waivers or deferrals of existing city fees. So obviously under discussion is, what fees we would be deferring. I would ask that, I'm just going to call it 12,000. I'm going to round up that $12,000 fee. That was just impact fees, or was that impact and building fees that we were looking at, that 12,000?
That's just development impact fees.
Okay, that's what I thought. And then obviously deferral versus waiver and what units would be eligible. So discussion on this item.
Are we just talking about fee waivers and deferrals? Because, we have the inclusionary and lieu fees or the.
That's
the
numbers
other
3 and
fees.
4.
Yeah, so we're going to get to those.
Yes, we'll get to those.
On this, the building fees are reflective of direct cost of your office administering the building permit, correct?
Building fees are really what we call plan check fees. Those are the
Okay.
fees that someone pays for us to do our service of examining plans.
Right, but there's a direct cost, more or less, in terms of, I want to build a house, I'm taking up the time and personnel cost of your office to do that.
Yes.
And then the development impact fees, of course, are, new residents means we need new facilities, new this, new that.
Infrastructure.
For me, as attractive as it might be to waive that, I think there's a direct correlation between the building of these housing units and the costs. And I'm not enamored of waiving the fees. Perhaps they can be structured so they're less impactful, as we'll discuss on the other type of fee on small units. But there's not in my mind, other than just subsidizing it, there's not a direct basis for waiving them.
Are they currently waived, Director, on affordable, low, and very low? Are we're waiving certain fees, or is that just CFD right now that's waived on
It's
those?
just $750 for ADUs.
Well,
under
that, but I
$750.
think, so I'm thinking the only other fees waived are the CFD for low and very low.
That is correct. We do
okay.
not charge with the fee for CFDs that are deed restricted low and very low are 0, and actually moderates.
For CFD on all 3 of
For the
those.
CFD, and then ADUs.
750 and under.
750 under, and then are the other ones prorated? Phil?
They're proportional to, yeah, so they're reduced as well, all the way up to 1,200 square feet. They're proportional compared to a regular size house.
right.
So they're all reduced for
I
ADUs
could see,
or exempt.
if you look at it comparable, that if the state is requiring us to waive development impact fees for ADUs under 750 feet, you could make an argument as to, well, why are we going to charge them, charge somebody who's building something else that's under 750 square feet? Why are we going to charge them when the state has exempted others? I could see waiving that. It's a cost to the city. It's a subsidy then by all of the rest of the taxpayers, but at least it would put them on an equal footing.
Can I just get a
Yes.
clarification? Because this is a discussion, so I'm trying to understand too. Are we talking all units under 750 square feet or just those deed restricted? I think when staff was bringing this to you, we were thinking of more encouraging those low and very low, whether they be low by design or, well, I think actually we were thinking deed restricted units so that we could count them for RENA. Or Councilmember Rabeau, are you thinking for all 750 or
What I'm
less?
thinking is that, the discussion item is which fees would we consider deferring or waiving? And if the state requires us to waive, development impact fees for ADUs under 750, if we aren't waiving them for, strictly we're waiving the any CFD charge for.
That
deed
is
restricted,
correct.
We're not currently waiving development impact fees for non-ADU units under 750
That is
that are deed restricted.
That is correct.
Well, I'm just saying that normally I would be opposed to waiving the fee. But if the state's already requiring us to waive the fee for certain types of construction, an argument could be made to put people on an equal footing if they're building a different category under that 750 square foot threshold. But either way, we're subsidizing that construction, or more to the point where we're putting the burden for constructing facilities on everybody else.
Councilmember Funk.
Yeah, if I could add a little bit to that discussion, it might be different, considerations might be different in terms of the units that we have that are one-offs in projects that, say a 20-unit project that is going to include, one unit or 2 units, that would be affordable and deed restricted in order to get some benefits in the project, versus for most of the production of low income and very low income housing, the bulk of it is in projects like People Self-Help's Del Rio Ridge project that they brought to us, that are where they're essentially 100% affordable units, particularly for units that involve supportive housing. So it allows them to have a manager and case management on site and supports for the residents there, for who need that kind of support. And those kinds of units are really almost exclusively getting financed through tax credit financing. And so the federal rules on that require them to have a certain proportion of the units that are 2-bedroom and 3-bedroom in order not to, because in other areas there's discrimination against families. So it would complicate what we're doing, our ability to support those projects to get those really hardest units to accommodate for folks that we really want to have be supported so that they're not hanging around in the creek bed. That group, we need the fee deferral for any size of unit in that project would be helpful if the whole unit whole project is dedicated to affordable, low and very low housing. It would help that. The other thing to keep in mind for these deferrals is that the time of deferral matters. I'm getting schooled on this stuff to try to deal with what we put in the countywide homeless plan. So forgive me, I've just been getting my eyes open on it. But it does matter to have that deferral go for at least 15 years. If we're going to defer, or as the mayor said, waive it all together. If that's really kind of, if we're deferring it and then deferring it again, maybe we just waive it. But if it can go out at least 15 years, then that's a point at which projects can get refinanced. And it's very, very helpful to the developer to have that length as opposed to say 10 years, which doesn't get them as much. So that helps them a lot and enables them to count it towards the local match. And both of those are really helpful, because otherwise our project, we can get a lot of that $600,000 that is paid for by tax credits and other things that we don't have to pay for out of local funds. If we can come up with enough of a local match somehow to get that project the points it needs to succeed. So I'm inclined to encourage a fee waiver of at least 15 years for development impact fees. I'm not real keen on waiving building fees. I'm with Councilmember Bourbeau on that. Those are direct costs that we incur. But the development impact fees, it spreads things out a little more.
Got it. All right, thank you. Councilmember Daras.
I think it was covered. I was going to follow up on something that Councilmember Bourbeau was talking about, but on the deferral of the fees, just to get my understanding of what you guys are talking about and your process is deferring is nothing is paid until a certain amount of time. And I think Councilmember Funk said 15 years. I was under the impression that maybe a deferral would be like sort of a payment plan over an amount of time. I'm not real in favor of waiving it completely. I mean, that puts a burden on the city. I think those things are important for certain projects. Now, the low and very low, I think it's also very important that we do try to minimize the costs as much as we possibly can, because it's obviously very difficult now to get anything to affordability. just by nature of what the economy is now. But deferral, I'm certainly in favor of a deferral in one way or another to minimize the costs over time for the projects. But that's all I've got on that.
Thank you, Councilmember Daris. Mayor Pro Tem Newsom.
Gonna side with a lot of my colleagues about the financial impacts of just doing waivers. I'm more interested in deferrals to help our projects be successful at this point.
Okay. So what I'm seeing is I've got 3 of my colleagues that are open to deferral on the impact fees. We're not looking at building fees. And Councilmember Borbo, just to clarify with you, you kind of had the 750, and I get your equity reason for that. But if you kind of look at what we're talking about in terms of deferral of fees for low and very low.
Well, I'm wondering in terms of Councilmember Funk's description, she seems to be talking about the kind of projects that People Self-Help Housing does, and trying to be able to be competitive so they can get the kind of grants to do their things. But are we talking about waivers that would apply to any and all units, as long as they're potentially going to qualify for low and very low? And I'm wondering, are we talking about deed restricted units?
Well, and that's a good question. And I'm going to ask staff, do we need to get that nitpicky right now? Can we say, hey, low, very low, look at deed restriction, look at affordable by design, and you're going to come back to us? Or do you want to know tonight, this is.
We were
where
hoping
wanna
to
go?
get a little bit more detail tonight so that we can write an ordinance and bring it back to you. I mean, obviously it can change. It certainly reduces the number. I just want to say again, staff's idea was to subsidize similar to the cash that we're doing, because don't get us wrong, this is going to be cash out of the city's pocket. This is cash that would have gone into our impact fee funds to do it. Similar to that affordable fee that would only go towards the low and very low income units and trying to subsidize those. This is what our idea was on that. We certainly hear the equity, we certainly hear the projects. But obviously the broader that you have, we have 750 square foot units that are luxury, that do not meet the low or very low or even moderate income level. We do have People self-help projects that are 90% moderate incomes. So the broader you make what this applies to, the less money goes into those impact fees and the further we get behind. That may still be right from the policy discussion. So that's an important thing that I want to hear from you guys on, yes, where are we on that balance?
I think what I would say is we want to stick with the low and very low. We have not had a problem building moderate housing. We exceed our RENA numbers every cycle for moderate and above moderate. So I think we would stick with the low and the very low. What my question is, do we need to say, I mean, if we can come up with low or very low of by design, if that can happen, can that be a part of it? Or do we need to say deed restricted? And do you need to know that tonight?
I think that if we can get them in the low and very low by design category, which it's my understanding is extremely hard with HCD, that we could do it by design. So that would be, up to you. Phil, do you have anything you want to add to that?
I think we can get to low. I don't think we can get to very low by design unless we go with a very, very, very tiny unit. But if someone can justify, after we do a little study, that their design meets that category, I don't see why not. I think that it could probably go either way.
So that
as long
could
as they
be,
meet those thresholds.
so that could be in the ordinance, because certainly we don't want to say affordable by design and folks are making their argument and really it's not, but wink, wink, nod, nod, it is. We would want to have some criteria that says, okay, if you're meeting these criteria, that does meet the affordable by design for low income, and therefore we could defer the impact fee. Is that easy enough to add in
Yes.
there? Okay,
Yes. So I think that would be sufficient direction, for example.
okay,
Because to answer your question, Mayor, I mean, what you brought up was what I was concerned about, and that is, I want us to get out of the city administering deed restricted things as much as possible, because they're a burden, they're administrative burden on the city, and they don't generate much in the way of housing units. Well, I had a question on that, but I like what you said about, you know, if you can do it affordable by design for low, and maybe in the extreme, very low, then that would be the place I could see waiving, you know, the development impact fees.
waiving or
Well,
deferring?
deferring, certainly
Okay.
deferring.
Yeah, let's,
Yeah. And I would comment though also, you know, when we talk about, we're all enamored of the work that people self-help housing does. But one of the things that we're forgetting about impact wise is that they're exempt from property taxes, correct? So, you know, what we lose in property tax from, you know, one of their projects over perpetuity, or let's just say a 30-year time span, is greater than what we're talking about waiving, and greater than what we're talking about contributing out of our affordable housing funds. That's the big subsidy when we talk about, you know, using them. And they do a great job, but I mean, there is a cost to the city coffers, to the rest of the taxpayers doing that.
certainly.
That's presumably why California man is asking for more money than people's. For relatively,
So
Yeah,
let me
yeah,
ask
plus
if we
cost of
have, so that we can move on to the next
Mm-hmm.
one. Do we have some agreement on deferring impact fees for low and very low, whether deed restricted or if it can be proven by some formula affordable by design?
I am a little uncomfortable with the impact fee deferrals on affordable by design units. Because I want to see that worked out pretty clearly, because my concern, I feel very comfortable with that for a deed restricted unit where, you know, it's going to be, you know, sold to somebody who's income qualifying. But, you know, we have such a tight housing market that it would be very tempting for people to, you know, do something. Now it qualifies for affordable by design. I get this deferral on all the fees, but I can charge anything that I want for it. And jack up the actual price. So that I want to be mindful that we don't use city funds in this way to subsidize that particular loophole, that we don't create that. And so is that specific enough of guidance for staff to be mindful in what we create?
Yes, we can bring back a couple of options, both the deed restricted and perhaps some formulas or criteria for affordable by design, so that there's a very clear playing field. At that time, you guys can discuss the pros and cons of each, but at least gives us enough framework to start crafting that policy and ordinance.
That works for me.
All right, Councilmember Daras, do we have a thumbs up from you? All right, all right.
Yeah, we're good.
Is that sufficient, Director?
Thank you.
Okay. So modified inclusionary housing policy. So what I found interesting is we're calling our current policy an interim policy as though it's only been in place for 6 months, but it's been in place for a decade and a half. So it's not really an interim policy, it's what we've had, but due to state density bonus, obviously it hasn't been working well. So thoughts, deliberation on inclusionary housing policy, and do we make it a policy versus an ordinance, and what would we want to see in that?
A question first regarding the state density bonus. When you, on the slide regarding state density bonuses, you showed some options that developers could pick and choose from. And one of them is, you know, having certain percentage of low or very low or whatever. When, you know, we have our inclusionary housing policy, which says, hey, developer, you're building 40 units, you got to offer, you got a certain number have to be low or very low, affordable. When the state says this, are they expecting us to administer that like we do on our own program?
Yes, they want us to incorporate that, and we can go above and beyond it. We just can't offer someone
Okay.
less than what the state offers.
Right, but I mean,
So-
the state has this density bonus program, but in terms of them saying, okay, developer, if you build so many, if you include so many low low or very low units, that's great. But the state wants them deed restricted and expects us to do the administration of that deed restriction.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
So even though I would like us to get out of the deed restricted administration business, we're stuck in it because of the state density bonus law.
Yes, that's one predicament that we are in.
Okay. Because I'm concerned, and we all up here know some of the issues we had to go through with the deed restriction process. It just seems to me to be very administratively costly, but it's kind of like we're stuck with it anyway, as you're telling me.
For that particular category,
Okay.
for a density bonus, we are. I mean, it's not, I don't think there's a law that says you can't use affordable by design to get there. But typically that's only going to happen with a moderate or low unit. And I don't know that they mandate the deed restriction, but typically that's going to be what's going to happen with
Okay.
a
Thank
density
you.
bonus
Just wanted
project.
to understand that. Thank you.
Director, I'm curious about something. You said that there are a myriad of options within the state density bonus law. If we were to look at an inclusionary housing policy, could we do something where we look at the state density bonus law and sort of pick the ones that might fit what we're trying to accomplish and then somehow incentivize that?
Exactly. Yes. And that's what the state kind of wants you to do, is take their chart, their whole ingredient list, and say, we're going to take that and we're going to localize that and say, here's what we mean by incentives. Here's what we mean by concessions. Here's what we mean by waivers. Here's the things we can offer you based on your level of affordability, in addition to the baseline bonus that the state offers you automatically. And so it comes together as this another toolbox within a toolbox that gets you there. So that's the whole idea behind a density bonus program. And that's why a lot of jurisdictions have their own density bonus program, because they build in it all these local values that are in addition to the state thresholds.
Okay, so I think based upon, the conversation we've been having this evening, that number one, focusing on low and very low, yes, that is where we need to focus, not on the moderate. Eliminating the state density bonus, it almost seems that we would be working with, we would be saying, okay, of the state density bonus, here are the ones that we would, potentially, that we would like you to consider, or that we, I don't know, how would that play out?
The reason that bullet is there about eliminating the state density bonus, right now, our
Because right
inclusionary
now
housing
our-
policy
yes.
just says if you use that, you're out. You don't
Correct.
have to worry about doing our stuff.
Correct.
So that's all we're saying there.
Yeah, so obviously we would eliminate that from there, but what we'd really be looking at, like percentage requirement, state density bonus, we could potentially look at what the state's doing and pick and choose what we want to incentivize.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Councilmember Funk.
Yeah, am I correct in understanding that there's sort of two different things we're talking about in terms of the state density bonus? That one of them, this is what's eliminating state density bonus here is eliminate the use of the state density bonus as an exemption to local requirements.
Correct.
Okay,
So yeah, just eliminate the exemption.
okay, and then the mayor's talking about something else.
Well, she's talking about really dialing down sort of an ingredient list for how we further incentivize a density bonus project. Now, there is some automatic things in there, like there's some automatic things in there for certain thresholds of projects where they can ask for waivers of development impact fees already and things like that. But there's other stuff we can do. So I should probably try and pull up one of those density bonus charts so you can kind of see some of the complexities of that. Let me see if I can find one.
That might be helpful. Those of us who serve on design review have seen a fair number of those things come through, because the projects often come up with requests for this or that or the other benefit, because two or three things. So almost always parking requirements are changed.
I guess I'm confused though
Building height is often-
by this. I'm more confused now by this bullet than when I first saw it. I mean, so, because we're saying here that one of the things we could do would be eliminate the state dense, because we can't eliminate the state's density bonus itself because they're mandating it. They're
Correct.
mandating that we
No.
offer those things, right?
There's no way out. That's there regardless. What we're saying is, right now, our interim inclusionary housing ordinance has, if you comply with the state density bonus, you don't have to do anything else. You're good. Just build a little bit of moderate units and you're fine. You don't have to do anything else. We're saying eliminate that exemption and instead say, okay, if you do the state density bonus, we're still going to require, for the rest of your project, for your market rate units, we're still going to require something. That's the thought there. Or are we going to require something? That's the question, really.
So let me just clarify too. Sorry, and I don't mean to get us too far off on that state density bonus thing. You can have, just like you can charge an affordable in lieu fee, you can also require projects to provide housing units. So ignore state density bonus law, ignore all of that. Instead of paying the fee, they have to build a unit. They don't necessarily get bonus, extra density. They don't necessarily get any of those things. So you have that right. You can require to them to do it. Or we could look at an affordable housing policy like the mayor was talking about, where we add extra incentives for them to do it. And if they get those incentives, should they still be charged a fee? Should they not be charged a fee? If they don't get incentives, but we require them to build the project, we can't require them to build it and charge incentive and charge fees, because then we're double dipping against them. So this is a broad spectrum. There's a lot of different things that fit under this category on what you guys would like to see. Our current policy was everything that came to you that required, wanted exceptions had to build the affordable housing unless it was waived by the council. So we're asking about something like this. This is a way to get units built. This is a way to get units built throughout the city rather than in those large nonprofit projects. In some ways, depending on whether we adopt a fee or what level that fee is, this might be a benefit to the developer. It might, if I'm building, 10, 2,800 square foot apartment units, building one affordable, very low, might be way less than the fees, depending on the fee level and stuff like that. So those are the things that we kind of want to discuss. Did that help?
You're really talking about combining numbers 3 and 4 right now, tools 3 and 4. You're saying if we do 4, we're not, or if someone's building it within the inclusionary, let's say, 20% of units, just because that's our current policy, we're not going to then double dip with tool number 4, which is an impact fee for.
Correct.
So it's kind of the one or the other. Correct. I think, going back to the thing that we want, the low and the very low is what we want to be able to incentivize. And I'm wondering, how do you need to know from us tonight that 10%, that 20%? Because I feel like there's more nitty gritty of getting into those numbers and really seeing what that right number is. And I know, Ashley, I might ask you this question because you had, like in your fee studies, a lot of like, hey, this is maximum, but here's what's feasible. Like, that 15% profit, a 5% profit, and here's what led to that. Do you have any numbers that show us what's feasible for an inclusionary policy in terms of, right now we're at 20%, versus 10%. Do you have any of that information?
Probably not ready to share at this point. We do have the ability to prepare all of that for you. And what we would do is, we had a slide where we talked about the feasible fees, well below the Nexus fees, but the feasible fees. And what we do at that point is we sort of work backwards, and we can build a model. We have it where we can say, how does that fee translate to an inclusionary program? There are a lot of moving pieces, though, as you've all noted. There's not just the overall inclusionary requirement, but there's the to what degree you're targeting very low or moderate. That can affect all of the economics of it as well. One of the things we've talked about in the past is that, not all development applications that come forward can comply with the on-site requirement due to topography, or it's a single family home, or there are lots of reasons an inclusionary requirement might not make sense for a specific project. And so at that point, we start talking about other ways of complying with the inclusionary requirement, which is actually it's state law that you provide alternative means of complying. One of those alternative means of complying can be an in lieu fee. And then we're still talking about impact fee versus in lieu fee, but they can be set to be virtually the same so that an applicant is indifferent.
Right, they would do one or the other. They wouldn't be charged both. Yeah.
No.
Okay. Thank you, Ashley. I was trying to get an understanding of what's feasible, and who knows how we picked that 20% when none of us were sitting here. I'm sure there was some good research that went behind that. But I'm hard pressed, maybe not. I'm hard pressed to say 10% is the number or 20% is the number, because I don't know what is feasible. Because at this point, we're putting it on the developer. I understand the policy that we've always had with inclusionary is to incorporate those low and very low, particularly throughout the community. And I think that's important. I think many of us would agree that we want to see more of that. But what those numbers exactly look like to make it feasible, it's hard for us tonight to say, hey, here's the percentage, director. Councilmember Borbo.
In regards to what's feasible, I mean, what's feasible is what pencils out for a developer, I'm
Correct.
assuming. And so, in a certain kind of market, because all of these things we're talking about is essentially imposing a cost on the developer. And the developer is going to pencil in that cost, and he or she's going to go, okay, I can still build, still make a reasonable profit under these restrictions and these basically requiring subsidies from the developer. And so in a given market, 20% might work fine for them. In another time, 5% would be too much, and they're going to pencil out the project and go, this doesn't work, I'm not going to do it. And all of these things in the long run, statewide, result in less houses being built because they're imposing an artificial additional cost on the developer. And we have all of this revolves around a concept of, we're going to force them to put in more money in the pot that we're going to utilize to provide affordable housing to a small number of people. And it drives up the price of housing for everybody else who's paying market rate, whether that's to own or to rent. And so what the market will bear is going to depend on the developer at the time and the project and a whole bunch of other, factors. But I mean, there's no free lunch here. We're all talking about taking money out of the pocket of the developer. Developer isn't going to do it for free. They got to make their profit. They're not bad. They are the people that build housing for our residents. So they're the good guys here. And when they do that, it's got to pencil out. And like I said, so it doesn't matter if it's 10 or 20 or 5, it's got to pencil out or they don't build.
Very true. And what I was trying to say is, how do we just come up with that number tonight if we don't have some semblance of an idea of what penciling out might look like? And it doesn't sound to me that in an ordinance you can have a flexibility of, hey, if something pencils, because that can be an arbitrary number, or based upon what a particular product, a particular property, etc. So that percentage requirement we're just sort of arbitrary right now. Councilmember Funk.
Yeah, and I also know that Ms. Rickard wanted to weigh in on something if I'll give her a chance.
I just wanted to say, for this part, certainly you can go back and give us some direction. We can come back with some more information on that and have a bunch of stuff written for that too. So that is a possibility. It feels like 3 and 4 are tied. We have some semblance of what's feasible for rental and that just because Ashley has done some preliminary work on that, but don't feel like you have to come to an exact percentage tonight. Direction to go bring us more numbers on feasibility. But before we do that work on feasibility, is this a place that you guys want to go is probably the very big question.
Yeah, thank you. And that's where I wanted to weigh in, if I may. I want to suggest, some principles that we might consider using for this. One is that I do think it's valuable for us to make changes in the current policy. I'm uncomfortable with the way as the situation around it has evolved. It only means that we're currently only really requiring inclusionary housing in the higher density projects that are going to be the most affordable anyway. Pretty much that.
Well,
Because
I
almost
don't
everything
think
else
any of
is-
us disagree that we're going to change our current policy. Nobody's
Okay,
wanting
good.
to stick with that.
So we'll start the chalk one up that we've got agreement on. And then I think that there's value in having that inclusionary element to ensure that housing gets distributed or affordable housing gets distributed around the community rather than having it all be concentrated in any neighborhood. But it's also valuable to have some of that housing that is in cohesive projects so that supported services can be aligned with the housing. And I think our administrative issues, as that Council Member Bourbeau has talked about a lot, have been particularly issues with owned housing. And the complexities of that versus affordable units that might be rental. I think that so. What I might suggest is are considering having a less extensive, having more opportunity for owned housing projects to pay in lieu fees rather than creating owned units that we have to have all that administrative stuff on. And then potentially, which either might mean a higher number of units, not just 10 or less, but some bigger number, or consider, or an owner versus rental model. Or one of those two approaches be something that allows a little more opportunity for people to buy out of it using fees in ways that would help us reduce the administrative costs of these programs and ensure that they are directed towards the low and very low persons, that the market is never going to be able to build houses that they can afford. So that would be my thought. And then we'll have to look at what the feasibility is financially for percentage requirement.
Let's see, any other?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an excellent point regarding the, when it comes to talking about building a neighborhood of single-family homes, the administrative requirements of having a deed restricted thing there, it would probably be, to me, make more sense, which I would think is what Councilmember Funk is describing, to allow for, single-family home projects, to allow them to pay perhaps a higher in lieu fee, as opposed to them setting aside, 1, 2, 3, 4 houses and going through the very cumbersome deed restricted process for houses, but have them pay an affordable housing in lieu of fee, which in this thing is, premised on the idea that, the bigger house you're building, the more you're creating a demand for service sector workers, et cetera, who need affordable housing. I like the idea of not requiring a percentage of units in single family neighborhoods, focusing on trying to, get some fee money to support low and very low apartment.
But to be clear, one of the things that both Councilmember Funk and I were talking about is there is a value to having those units spread throughout town, not just in a focused area. But what I'm hearing from you is, no, let's not do that. Let's take that money and give it to someone who's going to build more of a project.
I wouldn't say it's, I agree with the desirability of having things spread around town. But I mean, they would be in the sense, as long as our multifamily housing is not concentrated in, one area of town, we should have our multifamily housing spread out, although realistically, it's not going to be on acreage on, far out on the west side.
Our city manager wants to weigh in again, which we appreciate, by the way.
Yes. I just want to clarify, a lot of our affordable housing administrative burden is with the moderate equity sharing program. So that is the program right now that requires the most administrative burden. We would only be talking about the low and the very low. The for sale units may require a little bit more administration than those rental units, simply because we don't follow the rental units throughout their life right now. Whereas we do, because those are a deed restriction when they get sold, usually they come back to us. As a percentage of admin, they're not that much more. Those tend to be fairly simple. The person that bought the house knew about the deed restriction. They're usually right on top of selling it to another deed restricted person. Every once in a while, we'll get one that goes, oh, I didn't know I was deed restricted. And it takes a little bit to educate them about the deed restriction they're in. But for sale units in that very low perpetually deed restricted is not significantly more than perpetually deed restricted rental units.
Because you're saying we have deed restricted ownership properties that are not equity shared.
Correct. All our low and very low right now, deed restricted, are not equity sharing.
So when somebody goes into a house like that and 5 years later, their sale price though is limited because it has to go to another qualifying buyer, right?
Correct. It has to be sold for no more than the qualified price, and it has to be to a qualified buyer.
So they're only gaining equity to the extent that average incomes have gone up.
Correct. Yes.
All right, so if let me try to corral us in on something here. Mayor, did you have, no, okay. I'm not seeing Councilmember Dares. Okay, so with the modified inclusionary, I think what we're looking at is we do want that focus on low and very low. Yes, eliminate the state density bonus to the extent our inclusionary somehow incentivizes the types of building in the state density bonus that are geared towards low and very low. I think that could be very helpful. That percentage requirement, if that's something you can come back to us, I don't want to ask you to go do, 500 hours worth of work to find out what is an acceptable percentage of units. But if there is, something within the development world, something Ashley can help to figure out that says, okay, here's kind of where you can pencil with it. And, to your point, Councilmember Borbo, that may change from project to project, but we've got to come up with some number. And I think for us here tonight to just say, oh, it's 10 or 20%, we don't have the information to do that. And a threshold for payment of in lieu fees. We've currently had it at 10, but is that also something that we need to look at differently?
That's
And
square
the other-
footage threshold.
The other sort of big overarching question that touches on is the threshold altogether for this policy. Right now, this policy is only on these legislative acts. How open should this
I think we
policy
want it on
be?
all new policies, just like we do with the CFD, all new projects, building going forward.
And so that could be at all new housing projects of 5 or more units, all new housing projects of 10 or more units, all new housing projects that require any kind of exception, such as a use permit. Those are the kinds of levels that we're really talking about here. Should there be a different kind of threshold on that? Not just on the in lieu fees, but for the whole program itself. When does it get triggered? Is probably the biggest question I think staff has for
Well,
this
that's
particular item.
typically when we have some sort of a project. It's not just one person building their home on a lot.
Typically, yes.
So we're talking about where somebody is building, I guess 2 or more units with the intention to sell those units and not live in that unit.
Some jurisdictions surrounding us have a threshold of 5 or more units. Some jurisdictions have it at 10 or more units. those are just examples that are out
I-
there.
Mayor,
Yes.
may I also recommend, and I apologize, Councilmember Funk, that we bring that back to you when we look at the feasibility.
Yes.
It doesn't make sense to set it at 5 or more unit if our threshold is 5%.
Yes.
You would need 20 units for 4. So we want to make sure that those are proportional so we can bring
Well, and
that
then we'd
back
be
at the
going with
same
in
time.
lieu. So, I mean,
Yes.
that makes sense.
That's-
But yes, if you could come back with threshold and the percentage, and then of course, anything under that threshold would be, we'd be looking at
lieu.
in lieu fees, which we'll be talking about next.
Sure. And I would add to that, if I may, that I think one of the major reasons to make a change is because we've gotten into a situation of equity where, larger, 1 or 2 home projects can be built and impose significant costs for service level jobs on the community that are not there.
That's the
So-
next tool we're talking
Yeah,
about.
so as we're looking at these two tools
Yep.
together, thinking that it is not appropriate for us to be subsidizing, large single homes. If when we're asking projects that are larger to do that.
That's our next item though. So yeah, okay, hold on for a second.
You fooled us because you kept using the word thresholds. And that's the next.
And it is though, thresholds. Okay. Are we good from the council members? Yes, Councilmember Daras,
Yes.
all right. Director, is that sufficient? Thank goodness. All right, number 4. Yay.
Mayor, may I just kind of
Yes, you may.
give some context for number 4? Ashley and her team were hired to do the Nexus study to figure out what was the maximum we could charge. Obviously, those numbers were very large. And so we asked her to go through another exercise just to give context. There is nothing magical about the 613,000 other than that is the information we got. There is nothing magical about 6%. It could be 8% tomorrow. It could be, we get a lot more units from state density bonus. We don't need money for 32. We could get a lot less units from ADUs and we need more than 32. So all of those are things that the council can do. It's just a matter of where do you feel like is the right level, because it's a balance, as you said, the more burden you add, the less units might get built. You don't add enough burden, you have nothing to put in the pot for those local matches. All of the numbers that we looked at were below the, that she used in her example, were below where the preliminary feasibility numbers are showing up, which were more in the $10 to $15 range. Is that correct, Ashley? $15 square foot range. And so just as context for your discussion.
Yep. And maybe, Director, this could lead us on a wild conversation that just goes all over the place. Maybe you could bring up the slide of, sort of the options. And I know there was, A, B, and C, and then within there was 1, 2, and 3, or it was A, B, C, and 1, 2, 3, and A, B, C, D. I don't know. There's that, but then there was the table you had. You have that table available.
Well,
Yeah.
Yeah, or we could refer to
Yeah.
page in the staff
It's
report.
in
if we
the
need to.
staff report, I
It's in-
think.
Yeah.
yeah,
84.
page 84 on
Yeah.
the staff report.
And I do have that spreadsheet, so
Oh,
we
there we
can
go.
plug
There we
in.
go. Yeah.
Yeah,
So, okay. So
okay.
there's scenario A. We also have scenario B and C. So what I'd like to do is get a quick, between A, B, and C, if you could give us literally a 10, 15 second synopsis on what each one of those is, Director, A, B, and C, because I want to kind of take a little bit of a quick straw poll so we can zero in on something and
If I
have
could do that,
conversation.
Mayor,
Sure thing.
just because.
Thank you.
I was the numbers person, so. Phil's going.
Thank you.
Oh, my gosh. yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
It's like, I want to talk about pretty houses. Not spreadsheets.
Okay. The difference between each of these is for scenarios, I put in different thresholds. For scenario A, what I said, option 1 says, this is if we charge from square foot number 1, even the tiniest house gets charged square foot number 1, how much that would be. And then option number 2 was, hey, what if we set the minimum size at 1,000 square foot and we only charge those houses that were built that were bigger than 1,000 square feet, how much that would be. Option 3 was, what if we exempted 1,000 square feet? So if I built a 1,500 square foot house, I would only pay on 500 square feet because I was exempting 1,000. And option 4 was, what if I charged $4 for every house under 2,000 square feet, and I charged $10 for everything over 2,000 for all from square foot 1 for everything over 2,000.
I thought option, oh, I'm looking at scenario B, sorry.
Yeah.
Got it, okay.
And all of these options brought us to the 800, that if building was exactly like it was from 2014 to 2019, which we know it's not, but it's as good a spot as we have.
Yep.
That gets us the 800,000. Scenario B is different. It does set those thresholds a little bit lower. It used 750 square foot thresholds where you exempted the first 750 square feet, or the minimum unit size was 750 square feet, or the tier break size was at the 1,500 square foot level, and set the dollars a little bit different. That one also assuming we had the same building activity, got us to the $800,000 number. Scenario C was that, okay, we don't think we want to get to $800,000. We only set 60% of our impact fee level. Well, let's set 60% of that 32 unit number. We think that there will be other ways that we'll get that, whether that be through state density bonus or grants or the county chipping in or whatever other funding. So this just randomly picked a number of 475,000, which was close to that 60% number, and then had some of the same thresholds as scenario A with 1,000 square foot, and looking at those different options.
It was much more than a 10 to 15 second on each.
Oh, sorry.
I can appreciate that.
Sorry.
So when we still have a big maybe next to, could we charge these on some of those lower income and then waive them and get credit for that?
That's,
So
that we're
that's
definitely going to look
something we can
into.
Look into. So the way this could be used then, you know, in any of these scenarios or options is alongside an inclusionary that either, you know, when it's one house or 100 apartments, that here's our inclusionary policy. And if within that policy, you either don't meet the threshold to need to build, or we give you the option whether to build or not. If you're not building, you would be paying the impact fee.
Correct.
Okay. So with that, this could be an unwieldy discussion, but let's not do that. Councilmember Borbo, let's be nice and concise.
Well, I prefer option 4 under, well, I would probably prefer scenario A, but even there, I think the minimum, the exempted square foot at 1,000 is too low. The reason for that is, you know, we're talking about building, let's say, a 1,200 square foot house, 1,400 square foot house. This is, you know, what we're targeting for the middle class. I mean, these are people, these are not well-off people who are creating huge demands for service sector workers. Although I suppose everybody creates some demand for service sector workers who then need affordable housing. I don't feel comfortable charging an affordable housing fee to somebody or to a developer that's developing a house that's going to be occupied by middle, class people who are struggling to buy a house at all. I like the concept of option 4 because of you have a fee that starts at a certain size, whether it's 1,000, in my mind, 1,500 would make sense. And then it goes up at 2,000, because at that point, you're starting to get to where this house is going to be fairly expensive. In that, the people living there are going to be creating that demand we're talking about, and they're going to be able to afford the kind of fee we're talking about. And certainly if somebody's building a 5,000 square foot or 3,500 square foot house, they can afford that, and they're also generating that demand. So my preference, to try to get straight to your point, it would be option 4 under scenario A, but with an actual higher exempted thing, which I realize would reduce the revenue generated below the roughly 800,000 here, but that would be my preference.
That was very good. Thank you. I'm going to look to Councilmember Darris.
Sorry about that, having trouble unmuting there. Yeah, I was going back and, 2, 3, and 4 all seem to appeal to me in one way or another. But I have to agree with Charles that I think, looking at especially the different scenarios, option 3 certainly is the most expensive route to go with any of them. And I think that 4, it takes a lot of the burden off the lower income, the very low and the low. So I just want to reiterate, kind of ditto what Councilmember Bourbeau said. I think that's going to be the best scenarios for us to be able to implement this.
So scenario A, option 4.
No, I think, was it scenario A? No, I think it was scenario B. I think, wait, hold on a second here. Option 4 under.
So scenario A is
Oh,
on the
yeah,
screen,
yeah,
and
you're
it's
right.
also on page 84 of your agenda
You're right.
packet.
So scenario A, option 4, I think is my most preferred choice.
Okay, thank you. Mayor Pro Tem Newsom.
Mayor, I
Yes.
apologize. I just want to make sure.
We're
So-
moving nice and
I
smoothly
know.
here. Do you really want to do this?
I feel like I have to. So option 4 currently says anything under 2,000 square feet, we want to charge $4. And anything above 2,000 square feet, we want to charge $10. And we're going to exempt the first 1,000. So what you want to do is change that $1,000 square foot to 1,500.
No, we haven't done that yet.
Okay.
No, that would just be my
But, and
preference.
this is 750, not
Okay.
1,000. What I'm reading in the staff report says between 750 and 2,000 is, oh shoot, which scenario am I on? I'm on scenario A.
Scenario A is 1,000 to 2,000.
No, I'm on scenario A, option 4 says $3 per square foot. No, I'm literally looking at page 84. Go to 84. No, but look here, option 4. Okay, it's written incorrectly on the bottom. That's why. Okay. We're fine then. So 1,000, it's basically 1,000 to 2,000 is the $4 a square foot. Is that right? And then 2001 upward. Well, actually there's, anyway, using the chart, not the, not the words down below. All right, thank you. Mayor Pro Tem Newsom.
I'm going to go with option 4, scenario A.
All right. And Councilmember Funk.
I'm comfortable in this direction. I did ask Rochelle to try another option because it bothers me a little bit that we incentivize for cliffs in particular zones. So if our cut point is instead of being 1,000 is 1,200, there we put a big incentive for somebody to do 1,199 square feet and a penalty on that next amount. So I did explore the idea of a graduated thing where we have X dollars for an exemption plus X dollars per square foot above that exemption, and then, you know, a couple of cut points. We haven't come up with a scenario that pencils out decently yet. But that is an option that if we can explore, it would be worth trying.
And would that be scenario B though?
I'm confused, Susan, because I mean, does not create a cliff, because if you build under this scenario, and of course I would prefer a higher square foot threshold, but at 1,000, you pay nothing. At 1,001, you pay $4. You know, and at 1,100, you'd pay $400.
No,
There's cliff.
that's scenario B.
No, under option four, in either of the scenarios, there's no cliff. You just pay more.
Rochelle, could you
square
clarify
foot.
that? Because I thought the cliff was in A, but not in B, or is it just 4 doesn't have the cliff?
So A, B, and C are different thresholds. Options 1, 2, 3, 4 are different methods of calculating the
Yes.
fee. So option 4 does have a cliff.
Where's the cliff?
So if you look, the 1,050 square foot unit
Right.
is charged $4 a square foot
square foot.
for the whole unit.
But
For the full 1,050.
it says exempted square feet 1,000.
Yeah,
then all
so
of
at
a sudden
1,001, it's
Oh,
a
okay.
1,000 square foot unit is exempted. If you're at 1,001, your entire,
Yeah.
so it's
Yeah.
only an option 3 that you don't have. Option
Right.
3 does not
Option
have the cliff.
3 is the one that starts off gradual and goes per square foot.
Yeah, then
It just
I,
has an ended higher number. Yeah.
but to me, then I take that back, because what I want is, I want a tiered thing like option 4, but no cliffs. I mean, having cliffs doesn't make any sense to me, to have any cliffs where that next 1 square foot costs you, you know, $1,000.
Okay.
You should have an
So it's
exempted.
really a variation of option
Some-
3 then, is what I'm saying.
Right, so I think then what you would be saying is scenario A, option 3. It sounds like Councilmember Funk, that is also what you would want, not having that.
Right,
Right.
but also having a little bit of tiering there so that every square foot is not the same, that we allow a lesser price for smaller amounts of, lower amounts of square feet, and then gradually increase the dollars per additional square foot.
Mhm.
It does take some work, because the scenario I was not comfortable with the burden that this placed on the highest housing markets, you know, from the scenarios that Rochelle and I were working on this afternoon. But I think that there's a possibility of coming up with a scenario that way that doesn't have the cliffs to it and gets us to something that we could all live with.
Right.
I do think that we can aim for something, you know, that is a little less than the 796,000. That if we get something in maybe the $600,000 range, or we can, 600 to 700,000, that we can come up with ways of getting the others through promoting additional AGUs or some other mechanisms, so that we're not putting the entire burden of this on the new housing developments. So I'm comfortable with the fact that what Councilmember Bourbeau was suggesting in spirit would take that number down a little bit.
I'm also wondering, I mean, we get back, like, so let's say if we looked at, say, scenario B, what this does is it takes it down to 750, which I know Councilmember Bourbeau wasn't levying, but we can get to that in a moment. If we look at scenario B, option 3, that doesn't have the cliff, and it lessens that higher end burden a little bit, because if you look at the highest fee that you'd have under option 3 between scenario A and B, B is significantly less. And so if you went with that and the idea that, okay, maybe we don't need the full 800, if we go to scenario B and we raise that threshold to 1,000 from 750, keeping all else the same, what would that do? You know, could we be okay with 400, 600, something like that? And also, if it can be waived and be a part of that credit, it actually would be okay to have that there because then we can waive it at the end and get credit for that without actually having to charge it on the developer or on the development, I should say, but
Well, my bad for not catching the cliff there. I mean, I really would conceptually want to see something that's between 3 and 4. I don't believe in any cliffs. I think cliffs are completely unfair and distort, the housing market and everything else, where, that next foot costs you a ton of money. That doesn't, to me, that's, completely unacceptable to me. But I like the threshold of saying, between this size and this size, we're going to charge you this much for each additional square foot. And then over 2,000 square feet, we're going to charge you a significantly greater number, because you're presumably generating the need for more affordable housing. So, I mean, I'm looking for something that's an option between 3 and 4. Don't know what that would do to the bottom line numbers. Because you guys have to like play with that in order to say, okay, well, gee, if we made it, if there's no cliff and we made it, 4 and 10 or whatever, this is a likely impact. But conceptually, I would like to see, something between option 3 and option 4, that is no cliffs, but a tiered fee and at least 1,000 exempted. I prefer more, because I just don't see that 1,000 or 1,100 square foot house, that the people buying those kind of houses should be helping pay this kind of fee.
but again, if that, do you understand what I'm saying though? If that can be a fee that we waive and get credit for waiving it with, say, a people self-help housing, then I want us to have that fee on the 1,000 or the 750, because then we can waive it, we can get credit for it, and there's no harm, no foul done. Like, okay.
Understand, but I don't think that that's likely to occur, because a lot of these fees,
In case
here
it
we're talking
is,
about
you
single
just
family
never know.
houses.
Yeah.
You just never know.
Yeah.
And the good news for Councilmember Lebeau is that Rochelle has already done the math for that, sort of sliding tier thing, because that's what I was working on, because I had the same concerns about those cliffs and wanting to have something that was, that avoid the cliffs, but had a curvilinear function. Thank you.
All right, so if we're looking at minimum unit size, if that doesn't end up being an option, okay, if it does, then we're talking a different story. If that doesn't end up being an option, then we've got a minimum unit size here of 1,000 and scenario B at 750. To me, I'm thinking 1,000 is a good size, but I'm hearing maybe some disagreement on that and wanting that higher. Any quick inputs on that?
Well, what I would like, if it's not too much work for staff, is, for them to kind of run some numbers for us. In other words, I'd want it to be higher than 1,000, but if that's going to kill, drop the number generated from 800 to 450, well, maybe I need to back off of that.
Well, but we could also say, hey, we want to make sure that the annual subsidy doesn't go below X amount. Like, do we want to say we want it to at least be 750? Versus 800, that's not a big deal. Do we want it to be 600? Does it need to be at least 5? Do we want to say, hey, we want the full amount no matter what? We've got to figure out a better way to get this. That's part of our discussion tonight too.
Well, I would just like to see them try to run some estimates, based on, okay, if minimum unit size is 1,000 or exempted square feet is 1,000, what happens if it's 1,200?
Well, I want you to look at that, those highest fees, those go up and up. Those are pretty significant. I mean, personally, I can go with the consensus. I would prefer scenario B. I would prefer that those 1,000, 750 and up, but there's a little bit there. That's not a large amount. If you look at option 3, that's not a large amount, but you lessen that burden a little bit and you don't have the cliff on that. That would be my preference.
Right. I mean, I see there you're lessening the burden on somebody building a 5,000 square foot home who can more amply afford that than the person building the 1,000 square foot home paying 3,000.
But there's no individual person building a 1,000 square foot home. We're getting back to talking about a multifamily unit. This is a larger development. You're typically not going to see a single family unit.
To be clear, though, these fees would apply to single family homes being built, correct?
Yes.
Yes, but I'm just saying, I don't think we see a lot of single family homes coming forward saying, I'm going to build 1,000 square foot, single family home. Or I could be wrong about that unless you're talking about a planned development.
They're mostly 2,000 square
Yeah.
foot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Would it
So
apply to
I don't think
ADUs?
we're really hurting those. I don't think those folks are there that were actually, yes, Rochelle.
Would it help if I let you know that there's 813,000 square feet that were built during that period?
Yep.
If we take out everything under 1,500 square feet, everything, if we exempted the first 1,500 square feet, we're going to have to spread the fees over 143,000. So you're looking at 143,000 square feet. So you're looking at a $40 per square foot thing. Our average home over that period was 1,500 square feet. So we have that's the median, sorry, not the average. The average probably a little bit lower than that. So anyway, those all play with the different numbers. We can certainly come back and run some scenarios. The lower that number of the amount exempted, the lower the fee per square foot above that. We can play with some numbers and bring some information back to you if you want. But I'm kind of hearing the concerns, so this is very, very helpful.
Okay. So based upon our conversation, it sounds like we're wanting to get as close to the 800,000 as we can. Councilmember Dares, I'm going to need to see yes or no from you. Okay, good.
Yeah, no, I agree.
As close to the 800,000. We don't want to see a cliff. There's some concern about, hey, are we burdening the lower income? But then, as you said, we can't shift all of it onto the higher level because that just, there really is a certain fairness there.
Right, but to be clear, I mean, I think on the one hand, a lot more smaller houses are being built than you thought, and the impact is a lot greater than I thought if we raise the exemption.
Yeah.
But if push comes to shove, I would, in myself, be willing to give more on the 800 to not burden some of these, what I consider relatively smaller houses. But I'm not, dead set on that tonight. I would like to see what they come back with.
So I'm hearing from you, Rochelle, that is sufficient direction.
Yes, we will see what we can do. We'll come back with some different options. Not as many as you had tonight, much more narrow. I definitely heard a blend of options, 3 and 4, no cliff, a tier of some sort. So the bigger units get charged on the bigger you do it. And that you'd like to keep towards that $800,000 range for now.
Yeah, and I would add on the 800 target that I'm comfortable if we can meet some of that by some other mechanisms, like additional ADUs.
Absolutely.
That I would like to see it. So it doesn't all have to come from this particular policy.
But again, we don't know that. We're sitting here making assumptions.
So staff can bring back that analysis.
A lot of
of
sausage here.
How all these other pieces play into the puzzle so that we know, do we have to stick to the 796 or do all these other pieces really discount that? And really in the end, all we need is 550 because we've got
Which would be great news.
these other things. That's the other piece of the pie that's missing from our analysis tonight that we'll bring back to you in detail.
Well, I want to thank you, staff, Phil and your team, Ashley, city manager. Is a lot of work that goes into this and we appreciate you and thank you for your patience tonight. Thank you for all of the public, a couple of members of the public here. And oops, I think I'm just trying to look and see. I'm sure we've still got some people on, a few of you. So we've got 5 public members total. Glad you're still here with us. So we've got direction on everything. And I think we are complete on this item. Excellent. So we've got, thankfully, no
Thanks,
public
Ashley.
hearings. We do have a closed session, but all right, you're good, Phil, right? All right. So now we'll go to council announcements and committee reports. I will go from my right to my left, Councilmember Funk.
Here, I met with the Homeless Services Oversight Council last week. It seems like that's all we do is meet with that. the particular, in addition to updates on the strategic plan and some discussions around that, because we are getting ready to release the full draft plan that's got, the technical details that the folks who are in the business, want to see about training and development and staffing and various things like that. I am also working on this, we are scheduling a variety of presentations to different groups. So if there are groups that you know of that would like to hear about the plan, we have an opportunity to discuss it. Please let me know or contact Joe Dzonic of the county. If this body wants an additional presentation with more detail, do let me know. My sense is that we kind of got enough high-level detail to be comfortable with the plan, where it's going at this stage, and you didn't need to dive into more. But if I read that wrong, let me know. And then the other thing that is just to be mindful, because you may hear things about it because it's going to go to the County Board of Supervisors. There's some sort of a subset of 2-year goals that we have to craft along very specific performance measures that the state has specified. So in order to qualify for the next round of funding for something called HAP, and don't ask me what it stands for, but it's the next, the next round of state funding for homeless programs. And there's basically $4 million at stake for us at this round, and plus another $1 million or so in bonus if we meet the goals. The state has set 2020 as the comparison baseline, which is really strange because 2020 was such an anomalous year. So there's a whole big fight that's going on about how do we craft quantitative measures that make sense around 2020 baselines. But at the end of the day, we're trying to get something that makes sense that we can track to meet those requirements. And that, our overall goal is still really to meet our 5-year targets and to achieve reducing the number of homeless persons to half the current level within 5 years. That's still the big target. And, we have to punch the ticket on the bureaucratic things to make the money, to get the money to require it. So you'll see communication about that. If you really want to go into a deep nerd on that, there are a couple of public sessions. And you can weigh in on baselines and quantification and goals and, nerd heaven. So thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem Newsom.
Visit Locale Advisory Committee met on the 19th. We met for the first time in over a year, and we talked about tourism and how at the moment we're starting to see an increase of about 25%, but it's not sustainable going forward. We'll get more of a gauge when we hit peak season, which is expected for July. So working together on tourism, seeing where everybody's coming from, Bay Area, LA, and good meeting. Next meeting for Design Review Committee is scheduled for the 16th of June. Don't know what's on the agenda yet. We're still working on council availability. Thanks.
Councilmember Borbo.
Yes, just that the Integrated Waste Management Authority Board had a special meeting last Friday, and we are closing in on selecting a new executive director. And so that will probably be announced within the next week or so if the process is completed.
Thank you. Councilmember Darris.
Thank you. APCD, the Air Pollution Control District, met last Wednesday. One of the key things that we talked about was schedule of fees, a slight increase, an adjustment to bring up to other jurisdictions, sort of on par with what that is. But it was a minor, I think it was just a minor increase on that. And then on Thursday, CAP SLO met. We're mainly working on the strategic plan and how to better serve and continue to serve our community in those regards. So that's all I have.
Thank you. We hosted I hosted a countywide mayor's meeting here in the Rotunda on Friday. We had Derek Dolphy from League of California Cities come. He is in charge of, basically the League of California Cities lobbyist on environmental quality and water. So we talked about SB 1383, which, we had on our agenda a month or two back, talking about the cost to the city for that, which every jurisdiction is facing. The league has requested in the legislature's budget this year, $180 million to go towards helping cities with that implementation. There's also AB 1985 that is in the process to try to expand the items that would be eligible for procurement, because right now it's the mulch and the compost or the RNG. And of course, we don't have RNG available to us here. So there are some things in the works, but I'm not seeing a lot of promise. The sense I get from Derek is Cal Recycle knows that we really can't meet these requirements, but they're pushing forward anyway because they want to push hard enough to make sure change happens somewhere along the way. So they're kind of pushing and waiting to see what happens, presumably when we all fail to be able to meet the requirements. Councilmember Borbo probably knows this better than any of us. So we will see where that goes. And with that, I will ask if there are any individual determinations or actions this evening. Councilmember Funk.
I would just like to put out a general reminder to folks to fill out and mail in those ballots. Or drop them
Absolutely.
at the library or other places that you can do so.
Absolutely. Thank you. All right, we are now going to recess to a closed session, and I will ask our city attorney to inform us of what we are going into closed session regarding.
Yes, this will be a conference with real property negotiators. It's authorized by Government Code Section 54956.8. The real property is located at 5970 El Camino Real. The agency negotiator is your city manager. The negotiating parties are listed in the agenda, and the subject of negotiations are price and terms of payment.
Thank you. I will go ahead and open up public comment. Are there any members of the public wishing to speak on this item? You can raise your hand. Anyone on the phone, Luke? All right, seeing no one, I will go ahead and close public comment, and we will go into closed session. Thank you. We will report out if there is any reportable item at our next meeting, and good night.